with this interview, I think it's cool because you want to chime in with questions you have for me. So we'll start with you. March 10th, 1957.
I was born. I don't remember being born.
Oh, real quick, let me chime in. So, Mom has had these these memory spells where you're forgetting periods of time. But I think from long term, you'll still have recall. You're gonna have recall of your life when I was born, these sorts of things. It seems like the primary issue has been within the last several years, events that have occurred.
Last few years.
But major events like my birth, my upbringing, your birth, your upbringing, those sorts of things, you're good with, right?
Yes, I'm either having some syncope issues related to the heart defects, or I've actually developed something else, which could be left temporal lobe seizures. But it just has wiped my memory of. I'm not sure how far back it goes, but it's 2 or 3 years anyway, maybe further.
Right.
I have general recall but not real specific recall.
Right, and so they weren't really sure. This kind of started in the last 2 years, and within the last several months, they've kind of identified it as probably not an acutely neurological thing, but more of a heart defect. And you were born with a defective valve. You had that valve replaced in year 2. Or anyway, you can get into the specifics of that. You had a heart operation in year 2. You had the valve replaced when I was a senior in high school in 2006. And now it looks like you're going to need that whatever is defective in the heart, you can go into those details, is causing now some neurological issues where you're having these, forgetting these major periods of time and having what could best be described as absent seizure type symptoms. But let's just start from the beginning because we're going to begin with your birth, and very interrelated with your birth is this heart problem that you were born with that is continuing to give you issues today. So let's begin there. March 10th, 1957.
Okay, so nobody had any awareness of the heart issues when I was born. But so I was born to 2 parents who were married to each other. They were my mom had just turned 20. My dad was just about to turn 20 when I was born. They had been married for a little over 9 months when I was born. I was their only child, of course. We lived in Dallas, Texas. My dad's parents also lived there, as did my dad's sister and her family. My other grandparents lived about 300 miles away in Louisiana. I just think I had a really great little easy childhood. We just lived in a probably middle-income suburban neighborhood. I was surrounded by people who loved me. My grandmother from Louisiana was there as much as she could be. My other grandparents we saw on the weekends. Jay was born when I was not quite 3.
Jay being your brother?
My brother, I'm sorry, that's my brother. He was born, like I said, when I was not quite 3. I'm just a very maternal person, so I'm sure that was quite an exciting and wonderful thing to have happened.
You had another brother?
That brother wasn't born, and so then we lived there till I was almost 6 years old.
There being Dallas.
Dallas, and then my parents wanted to move. My dad had been working as an accountant at Sears, and so my mom didn't really like the terrain of Dallas, so they looked at Denver, Colorado, and Atlanta, Georgia, and I can't remember why they decided on Atlanta, but they decided on Atlanta, and Daddy got a job with an accounting firm. And we moved into an apartment while they looked for a house. And I started first grade there. The only significant event I want to say about Dallas is when I went to kindergarten is I remember going to a private kindergarten. And I guess something that to me is significant about that time period was that one of the performances that I remember doing as a child for the end of school spring celebration of us graduating, we did a performance and we did blackface performance, and I think that's kind of a significant comment on 1963. So then we moved to Atlanta.
It was all white kindergarten?
All white kindergarten.
And the kids painted their faces black and did their little thing.
And we had to do a jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton was our song.
Jesus Christ.
And we were in blackface. And my parents, I consider my parents kind of Kennedy MLK people. And maybe not MLK in 63, but definitely Kennedy kids. And, in terms of their political leanings and being fairly progressive for being Southern children. But so I always tease my mom about her allowing me.
Wait, 63, wasn't that when Kennedy was shot?
Yeah, right after we moved. It wasn't shot while we lived in Dallas. It was after
shot in
we moved here.
November, like right on Thanksgiving '63.
Yeah, I can remember that. I remember.
But y'all were in Atlanta at the time.
We were in Atlanta. I can remember it being on the news though. I can remember being very crying.
Right.
Because my parents, they
Your
were
parents
huge
are hardcore.
supporter. Yeah.
Parents were.
But my mom.
Liberal, enlightened folk.
My dad may have become more conservative after my parents, because my parents got divorced later when I was a teenager. But my mom has, as we all know, has continued to be very politically
She's hardcore now. She's like a militant Democrat at this point.
May move to Canada, but
it's a little overwhelming.
Anyway, so that is a significant event I remembered. The other significant thing I would say about my childhood is, especially living in the South, is that we lived in a neighborhood close to Emory University campus, so that I would say we were in a really progressive area of the
This
South.
is when y'all were in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm. In Atlanta, we weren't in this. I would say the outside of the metropolitan area of Atlanta, and like what is now the outside of the perimeter area, probably was still very conservative and racially divided. But where we lived, I was very fortunate that it was all young professional families, and I went to school with black kids and white kids, and I don't remember that many different nationalities, but the kids I went with, everybody's parents were educated. They were ranged from, like, my dad probably was one of the lower educated people, being an accountant. There were lawyers, doctors, and I don't want to think like now you think about big, giant, affluent houses. That there were some 2-story homes, but most of everybody lived in like ranch style houses, and we probably had I know we had a very modest home in comparison to other people, but we were still in just this area, like professors and people have thought so I was just lucky. Probably I struggled a little bit in first grade. I don't remember not having great handwriting, stuff like that. But then somehow after I got past that first year of stuff, started to really excel in school.
I thought you had a heart surgery when you were like 2.
No.
When did you have your first heart surgery?
8.
At 8. So you were in Atlanta at the time.
Yes.
So what exactly was the problem they identified with the heart? How was that identified? How was it addressed?
It was identified because when you listen to my heart, there's a swishing sound between the lub dub of everybody's heart. It's got kind of like lub sh dub lub sh dub, and I can't do it because obviously he heard that. He took the blood pressure in my left arm. It was odd or low, so he took it in my right arm. There was like a 20 to 30 point differential between the two sides. He took them in my legs, and then he just told my mom, I think she's got something wrong, and they sent me for all these tests at Eggleston. It probably took a year before I ever had the heart surgery because they just sent me through a bunch of stuff.
What did they address with the heart surgery?
Heart surgery, so I had 2 defects. I had a narrowing in the aorta, and these go together a lot of times. Probably I had what's called a something. Anyway, there are 3 heart defects, which is a hole in your heart, a bicuspid aortic valve, and then a narrowing in the aortic arch. The hole probably closed itself. This is what I've learned since. Nobody ever even talked about the hole. I've just read a bunch about it. Anyway, the narrowing doesn't fix itself, and the bicuspid valve, which should have 3 flaps, doesn't close itself. They did the surgery in 1965, and at that point, Emory was one of the, just maybe 1 or 2 places in the U.S. that was even doing stuff like that. They hadn't come out with any kind of replacement valves at that time. So all they went in is they went in, cut out the narrowing, and sewed the ends that they had removed the small piece together, which created some scar tissue and also stretches the aorta, so it's not really still the same size as everybody else's. And they left me with the bicuspid valve. The next year, they started replacing valves, and those kids, a lot of them ended up with emergency surgeries because those valves all went bad. They weren't.
Oh, shit. So you're kind of fortunate they didn't do that.
Yes, it didn't. And so they watched me most of my life until we moved to Louisiana when my parents got divorced. And after that point, I really never had cardiac care. I think my mom just thought I was okay and fine and didn't need to worry about it. But there were a couple things that Morgan has talked to me about, like
Morgan's my sister.
Yeah, anyway, she thinks somebody would have told me I shouldn't maybe have kids, and I mean just some things that you put stress on your heart, or maybe anyway. But all that was fine, so that's really
so they just kept an eye on it essentially from that 8-year-old surgery up until you didn't have anything. You didn't have anything done until 2006 and
2005.
2005.
Yeah, and then that year, the year before, I started really struggling just to walk uphill, and I've never been able to run. I've never been able to hike like Mom and Sean. I mean, I can hike it physically, but I can't keep up the pace of everybody else. It's just always been a really frustrating thing for me. I consider myself pretty good shape and always been athletically stronger than most people my gender, but I couldn't run.
Cardiovascularly, not so much.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, short distance, 50-yard dash, I can compete. But
anaerobic activity.
500, I can't.
Yeah, you're in great shape, but yeah, you any sort of aerobic activity or extended elevated heart.
Right.
Then
but what I noticed that year,
in 2005
or 2004, was that just because I've always made myself go up the stairs at the office, and I was getting to the first flight of stairs and going, oh shit, and then going up the hill here, just over by the pool, which is not very big hill. I was so then I went in and had them check out things, and the valve had calcified because because it doesn't close properly. It just kind of built up.
Yeah, so they need to replace it. So replaced in 2005, and then they told you you're going to need it replaced in about 20 years. And so it's been 13. Mm-hmm. And within the last couple years, it hasn't necessarily been a physical thing like you're describing in 2004 range. It's been a neurological thing where you're having these like absence seizure type symptoms and forgetting major periods of time. Like for instance, you'd read it just to give listeners an idea, like you redid the kitchen, and a couple years ago, right around when we did the first interview, and you got a dishwasher, and then that's a pretty big deal for you. You don't ever really spend a lot of money on yourself, and you just spend a lot of time researching the dishwasher, and then one day you walk out in the garage and see a dishwasher box. Like, where the hell did this dishwasher box come from? Like, what's this dishwasher doing here? Like you had forgotten weeks of investigating this dishwasher. And I remember one time there was my nephew, your grandson, got sick, and you went up. He was in the hospital for about a week, and you went up to take care of your granddaughters, my nieces, while my sister, your daughter, was in the hospital taking care of my nephew. And you came back and had essentially like forgotten the fact that he had ever been sick, or like your trip up there.
Katie just mentioned the hospital, and I just panicked. My brain had nothing in it related to that. I knew I'd been there, but when she said the hospital, I was just like, "What?" Now I'm. You
didn't have a recollection of your grandson being in the hospital.
Yeah, and it's just like Christmas, Thanksgiving, all the things that preceded that January, which was this January of 2018. Just going to Greece with Morgan.
Just kind of like blank spots.
I can remember certain things. It seems like to me that I remember, I don't know, there's not really a rhyme or reason. There's certain things I remember so that I know those events occurred. Elliot's hospitalization, I now totally know it occurred. Katie will say stuff and it starts to put pieces of the puzzle together.
Right.
But the puzzle still has big parts missing out of it.
Right. But other people's recollection will help you fill in those pieces.
And then then something gets sort of triggered and I sort of start to remember things. But especially like if you guys talk about people that I've met with you or stuff, not Hunter, or people, or Matt's, just.
You're referring to my good friends.
Yes, but
we got to be careful with like throwing out names.
Yes, but new people that I've just recently met are really hard for me.
Right.
Yeah.
You can throw out names. I just have to describe them, or you have to describe them there, and pronouns and things like that. What about like aside from the like you missing kind of like these several days or weeks at a time of memory of these events over the last couple of years? What about the like? It seems like the other major symptom you've experienced as a result of this heart issue are like the spells that you described that are more like short-term nature that last, I guess, several minutes at a time, where you feel like it's almost like an absent seizure type thing. Can you describe what those are?
Well, it's hard to know what someone experiences as an absent seizure, so I'm not sure. They say
I don't think that's what it is, but that's the only thing I can.
Well, and the neurologist thinks it's similar to left temporal lobe seizure, but nothing shows up on an MRI and EEGs. I've had a couple of EEGs, sleep deprived and regular. I haven't done the 3-day overnight hospital study, but it's like you have sort of a deja vu feeling, kind of a feeling of apprehension that comes over you. And then it's almost like my brain kind of freezes for a second and I'm just looking at you and I'm hearing what you're saying, but I can't really participate in it for a minute. And that feeling of, it's a little fearful actually. But what I've learned is that when it happens now, I just go, no, to myself. you've experienced this. It's going to be fine. Just sit here for a second and it goes away.
Right.
And so I'd only had like 3 or 4 of them in the year or two before this February. But in February, I was making up the work that I had missed while I had been gone to Chicago. So I came back and I started working 12-hour days, like 5 days a week. And this was like a Thursday. And we were in an admin meeting. So I was like with the principal and assistant principal and anyway, some other people. And we were discussing things that we were planning to do. And it happened. But I mean, because it wasn't my turn to talk, I just continued to sit there and listen and then picked up without a beat. And no one had any clue. But 3 of them happened within that probably 90-minute meeting. But nobody had a clue.
Right. And it was around that time that I think then you reached out to us, me, Morgan, and Katie, your kids, and that's when we started like getting the ball rolling on getting this addressed and going seeing various specialists and stuff.
16 those 3 happened, and then 13 more happened over a 5-day period, and then I flew to Montana to Bozeman to Rowan, my niece's 13th birthday party. And while I was in Bozeman, the first person I actually told was Karn, because Karn is my sister-in-law, my younger brother's wife, and Karn has had some issues related to her family, and so I recognized that I was no more in control of what was happening to me than possibly she could be on sometimes things that happen with her. So I told her, and we had a great...
How long did these things last?
Just a couple minutes.
I'm thinking I experienced a similar thing, and I'm wondering because, we're starting to discover the issues you're having are essentially, I think in a simplistic way to describe them, is lack of blood flow to the brain, or limited blood flow to the brain, correct?
Possibly, yes.
Okay. So I have and I guess we'll get into this in a minute, but I have, when I was born, we think because of some sort of malpractice on part of the doctors or some sort of accident that occurred during the emergency that was my birth, like I have an occluded femoral vein. So my femoral vein is completely blocked and I have limited blood flow to my extremities. And I'll have these dizzy spells as well. And so there'll be a lot of times when I stand up where I experience symptoms that are very similar to what you're describing. And when I'm doing yoga, especially when I do back bends, or like I bring my head below my heart or some sort of an inversion, and then come back up, I'll have a very similar experience to what you're describing, where it's like I'm aware that I'm conscious, but there's no way I could talk. There's no way I could interact with other people. There is a sense of like, it could be a sense of fear, but or like doom or dread. But because I've experienced it essentially my entire life, I, like you, have learned to recognize like, oh, this is going to pass. And it's almost like now, it's like this feeling of like, it's like a high, like I'm on some sort of drug for like 30 to 60 seconds. And like I've learned to come to like enjoy it as like, oh, it's like I'm on some sort of drug right now. Like enjoy the ride for the next 60 seconds. This is cool. This is some sort of change of consciousness, right? But I'm wondering, like, okay, is there just like a long-term effect to this? Just like there's a long-term negative effects to using drugs? I'm like, man, is there a long-term negative effect to this happening to me on essentially a daily basis?
Well, okay, so here's the tie with me. We haven't gotten into the fact that the congenital stuff is returned, but also
be more specific.
The heart defects. So the valves going bad, the coarctation, the narrowing, and the aortic arch is returned because of the scar tissue and the fact that it was never really corrected to be as big as it should be. But also some of the research is showing that you have an aging vascular system. It's everything else is aging. Your muscles are aging. Your bones are aging. Mm-hmm. Your vascular system is aging. Nothing is as efficient as it used to be, no matter what you try to do. Mm-hmm. And so cold really impacts me. And so when I was having all these, it's the cold. You've always complained that these things, especially when you were playing sports, when it was a cold weather, these were painful. Mm-hmm. So it is the same. Now, I've never experienced the embracing like you're talking about. I have learned to breathe into it and accept it, except for after I had it. So a couple back, maybe 6 weeks ago, they ran a couple tests on me to figure out some of more of the heart issues. And when I went for the echo, I'd had a CT scan with an iodine infusion. And then I went for an echocardiogram, and the guy was doing the echocardiogram, and he was pressing in. And I also have a pacemaker, so that creates some pressure and blockage too, just naturally if I move certain parts of my body, like my arm over my pacemaker. he was putting the ultrasound wand or whatever, pressing in, and where he pressed, it turns out, because I talked to him about it, is a junction between like the left subclavian, the aorta, and I don't know what other arteries. He may have told me, but I've forgotten. And so I experienced one, but I was taking the Keppra because I'm compliant by taking the minimal dose of Keppra in case it is
Kepra's anti-seizure medication.
Yes, in case it's a seizure. And I'm also taking aspirin to thin the blood so that it can flow more easily through all these narrowings in my heart. But I had been taking children's baby aspirin, which had started to give me a really bad burn stomach ache. So I stopped for 5 days because somebody told me I could buy the coated adult baby aspirin, and I hadn't bought it. So I didn't take it for 5 days. So if it's related to the heart, my blood would have been thicker over the last 5 days. Then I went in for all these tests. He pressed down. I experienced one of the episodes while I was laying there with him, and I couldn't verbalize. After it happened, I said, I just had an episode to him. And I said, you don't even know what I'm talking about with an episode, but what were you doing? And then he did it again. And before he did it, I thought to myself, try to talk. Just say something to him so he knows when it happens. And because I had prepared myself when he did it, I was able to say, it's happening, or something like that. But it was like 2 words. And then he was able to say, oh, I was right at that junction of everything.
Right.
So then after that, I went to yoga, my yoga training that I'm doing. And we were on our mats, and I experienced it laying on my mat. And like you said, it was kind of like a high. It was like the first time, and I think it was partially to the relief that it had occurred cardiologically. And someone was able to see something, and there might all be this connection. But I felt the same way. Also, I was in meditation. I was relaxed and everything, so it was totally different. I wasn't having, but I know exactly what you
Right.
I went. It was.
You
different.
embraced it.
Yeah, more than embrace it. Yeah, yes. Didn't
Right.
just breathe into it, but yeah.
Yeah. So they've kind of discovered now that I guess the solution for the time being is you are going to have that valve replaced again. They were thinking that maybe it was going to happen now, but what they're going to do now is just put in a stent
to open up the aortic arch.
To open up the aortic arch, where you were just describing that the doctor had put the pressure to cause the episode recently, and they're going to see what effect that has. Give it a few months to see if that resolves some of your symptoms, and then hopefully delay the valve replacement for a couple years.
Yeah.
All right, let's flash back to your childhood. So you kind of briefly went over your time in Dallas. You moved here to Atlanta. You and your younger brother, Jay, you were describing how fortunate you felt to grow up in Atlanta, not in any sort of luxury, but modest means, but in a diverse area. Atlanta at the time, you just said inside the perimeter, which is inside the giant highway that circles Atlanta, which is Atlanta proper. It was a diverse, kind of eclectic
people of thought
area. People of thought. And you felt fortunate that you were raised in a family of thought and open-mindedness in the 60s. When was your brother born?
My younger brother.
Your younger brother, yeah.
Yeah, my youngest brother was born in 1971.
Okay, so while y'all were here in Atlanta.
Yes, and we still lived in that same house. And then soon after that, we moved outside the perimeter into Dunwoody, which was just more of a very middle class. Right. Probably more capitalist group than the Emory group. But it was still, that group I would say was more diverse in terms of very few, not as many Southerners, just kind of representative of how Atlanta is now. It's a very eclectic place. People that that's how Atlanta is. I think my generation is kind of the first generation that was born and raised really in the Atlanta that we know now. Wouldn't you say? Well, in this area of it, the areas that we were living in, yes. Right. I mean, because where I grew up, people had moved there from other places because it was university, commerce, things like that. But it seems now that my peers, the kids I grew up with, were born here. I wasn't, but I essentially was. I moved here when I was 6 months old. We'll get into that in a minute, but they were born here and they're staying here and starting a life here. There's a lot of opportunity though. Yeah. That's why people came to Atlanta for opportunity, and Atlanta's continued to be a place of opportunity. Yeah, it's not slowing down in terms of growth at all. That's for damn sure. All right. Tell me about the demise of your family. So, I mean, I had a very, very happy childhood. Apparently, my dad was not as happy, and so it is suspected that he probably had a relationship.
Suspected? This has been
No,
confirmed.
not that relationship. He may have had a relationship with someone when I was about 12. At least he had an infatuation with someone in the office that he worked in. Then when we moved to Dunwoody, Daddy opened his own office and his own financial whatever business, and he hired a bookkeeper, and the bookkeeper that he hired was in an unhappy relationship with her husband, and I don't know if you know, like, think about CPAs and people during tax season. They work all night every day, and they worked all night all the time with each other, and they ended up in a relationship with each other, which my mom confronted my dad about because she suspected, and he confirmed it, and he did not express a desire to get divorced. I don't think he was really as in love with Donna as he might have been with my mom, and he certainly was. We had a very strong family, and it was not my dad pushing for the divorce so much as my mom couldn't. My mom cannot stand betrayal,
right?
And she's very high standards, and that was it. Right. She was sure of it, and so they got divorced. We tried to live in Dunwoody for a period of time, but it was very, very traumatic to Mom, and my dad was now in an open relationship with this person. She left her husband. She and Jay got in an argument one night, and he ran away from home and then went to live with my dad. That was very upsetting. Jay is
She
is my mom, and Jay and Mom had gotten in a fight. Jay ran away, called my dad. My dad picked him up, and then he ended up living with my dad. Jay was only what was he, 13? And then she made the decision at the end of the school year for us to move to Louisiana, and I would have been a junior in college.
Not back to Louisiana, sorry. Texas to Atlanta, and then now
to Louisiana to live with her parents. Her plan was to return to school. She had never finished school. She'd only finished 1 year of college, and Sean was 2. I was 16. Jay was certainly, I'm sure, welcome to go, but he stayed with Daddy. It would have been my junior year
of high school.
So we moved to Louisiana. My mom put Sean into a preschool. My grandmother took him and picked him up from that, and then mom enrolled at Northeast.
Right.
And
Northeast Louisiana. Now Louisiana Monroe.
Yeah. Louisiana.
Her parents, so my grandmother's parents were from Monroe, Louisiana.
Well, her mother was. Your great-grandfather was actually from a little town called Bastrop. Not Bastrop, I'm sorry, Marouge, north of...
from Northeast Louisiana.
Yes.
Both of them. And then my grandfather's parents, your father, they're from Dallas? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And they met, your mom and dad met at SMU, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's what you alluded to, that...
They went to college 1 year.
That they went to college 1 year and then got pregnant with you.
Well, they got married and then they got pregnant with me.
Well, maybe.
No. I was born... I've had conversations with the mom. I was born...
Okay. Seems okay.
Yeah. Well, they just got pregnant.
Seems to be a history of that in our family. I don't know.
I think they got pregnant within a week or two of being married.
Got you. Allegedly. Okay. All right. So y'all are back in Louisiana. Talk about that transition. Not back in Louisiana. You're in Louisiana for the first time. She's back. My grandmother's back in Louisiana. Talk about that transition from enlightened suburban Atlanta to now you're in kind of the middle of nowhere.
It was bizarre. I guess I never really understood what the South was like. First of all, I was still in advanced classes, but the people in all the advanced classes in Monroe were all the people who of money, and they all belonged to the country club in the town. It was just it's a nice little city. It isn't a little teeny town. It's a little city, so there's a certain number of amenities and there was a university there, so it's a university town, but it was just an odd place. It was a very closed place. They weren't used to new people, so they didn't understand who I was. I just can remember, Morgan's made this comment too about, you can always tell Southern sorority girls, and I sort of cringe at making any kind of gross generalization, but I do remember everyone being blonde, and everybody being cheerleaders, and everybody's family having wealth and money, and I was kind of odd person out, and there were no black kids in the advanced classes. I don't remember any of them. The only kid I remember being another odd man out was probably the smartest kid in school, who went to the University of Chicago, who came back and taught some of the math professors at Northeast. I was invited to this presentation, but anyway, he was kind of probably an Asperger kid too, really, but really brilliant. Mm-hmm. The rest of them were just we were just all smart kids.
Yeah.
But anyway, when I got there, because of the advanced curriculum I had been in Atlanta, which had its track built in so that we could all continue that track all the way through high school, when I got to Monroe, they didn't have anything like that. And so when I got there, I was taking all the senior classes as a junior. And so at the end of my junior year, the counselor, well, not at the end, but mid-year, she said, I don't know what we're going to put you in next year. And she said, would you want to go to college? And I said, sure. Because, it was like, get me out of here.
Yeah.
And she said, well, you got to take the ACT. And if you make a certain score on the ACT, you can go to Northeast. And, the score was like a 24 or something. I think I made like a 31 and...
What was a super high standard to get into university?
No, it was really... And she said, then you got to make like a 2.5 or a 3.0 or something. And Northeast was easier than my high school.
I can confirm that. I was ultimately born in Monroe, Louisiana, the town you're referring to, and I graduated from the University of Georgia, but I ended up at Northeast Louisiana University, which you keep referring to, which is now University of Louisiana Monroe. I ended up there for a semester to try to play football in 2009, and I transferred from University of Georgia to Louisiana Monroe, and I guess you kind of forewarned me about it. I remember you made me promise when I transferred over there, like, you have to promise me if you do this that, essentially if I give you my blessing to do this. And I think you were kind of supporting me financially at the time too, like paying half of my meal plan or paying half of my college expenses. Mm-hmm. Like, you got to promise me you're not going to graduate from there. And that was kind of the agreement we made. And as soon as I got there, man, it was like,
it's culture
I don't
shock.
want to. Well, first off, it's a culture shock, but just specifically kind of to reiterate what you're saying about the academic rigor. Holy fuck, man! It was like my middle school. Like, in terms of like the quality of discussion that was occurring in class, or lack of discussion that was occurring in class. It was the academic rigor of some of my middle school. Like, my high school here in suburban Atlanta was significantly more challenging and of a higher intellectual standard.
But you've also always been the accelerated part of the programs. We've always been there, and there's no comparison. I was literally probably the smartest kid at the school, and I'm not saying that. I would not have been the smartest kid at... Well, I received some scholarship offers from Rice, Emory, Agnes Scott, and I knew that Mom didn't want me to leave her, so I didn't pursue those. And also, I just had no way. I couldn't have detached from what was going on with that part of my family at that time anyway. But I would not have been the top student in any of those schools. At Northeast, I could do it without even thinking.
Right.
I had several professors try to get me not to stay there, try to get me definitely not to major in psychology. They wanted me to be a math or a science major, stuff like that. And anyway...
You made the decision you made.
I made the decision.
And we'll get into that in a second. Real quick, though, I want to touch on the cultural shock as well, because you kind of only touched on how when you moved to Northeast Louisiana, like it seems like your primary recognition was like what you described as kind of like these Southern sorority girls in the country club aspect of this very white Southern nature of the area. But Northeast Louisiana Monroe is like very diverse in terms of like aggregate number of people. Like, there's plenty of black people there.
They all live on the other side of town.
Right. So can you describe that? Because my experience wasn't... I think what you're about to say is like, it's not like there's a lack of black people, or even now in Latino people. But depending on what like social circle you're running in, you wouldn't know it.
I don't know.
Even today, it's a very segregated town. Talk about what it was like.
I would be curious to know if Monroe has... I was just back in Monroe in June when you went to see your dad.
Yeah.
And I stayed with Barbara. I still didn't see any black people living on that side of town, and I don't know how they get away with that, first of all.
What do you mean, get away with that?
How can they not sell homes to people of color?
Well, I don't know in 2018 if it's necessarily a concerted effort or if it's just a matter of...
choice of black people just don't
either
want to go
choice or
socioeconomic
capacity.
Surely, though.
I don't know. I mean, Monroe's not a very affluent town.
And I may be wrong. I certainly didn't go in everybody's house, so I should ask Barbara, hey, I need to ask this question of her, because she lives there now.
Right.
And it's a beautiful, nice, sweet place to live if you...
but it's not a bustling metropolis. I imagine the people that do have money there, it's old money. And then because I worked on I worked in West Monroe as well when I was there for the semester volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club, which was pretty diverse. Like, it was pretty 50-50, 50 white kids, 50 black and Latino. And there is some deep poverty with the white population.
But West Monroe's different, too. You know, that's a segregated. That's considered more the redneck side of town.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Is Monroe. West Monroe's on the other side of the river. That might even have more diversity of thought, though, because people have worked their way up within that culture.
Right. But I don't think the fact that you're describing, like, why aren't any black people living in these more affluent areas, I don't think it's a matter of, like, some concerted effort to keep them oppressed. I think Monroe is just a very stagnant place, like a lot of small towns in the South. I think it's a very stagnant place. There's not a lot of growth. I think one of the primary issues is, like, you grow up around, there's no one has, like, an example of what, like, thriving as an intellectual or as a professional or even as, like, a human being is. You're just kind of surrounded by the same sort of stagnation and school of thought that has existed there for 200 years. So I think the people that have money, I think that's just the same money that's kind of being passed down in white hands for generations. And then both on the white and black side, it's the same sort of poverty. You're saying the redneck side for the white people, and then, you know, the black people that have been stuck. These are the same families that were enslaved at some point. You know, I think that same sort of poverty, both on the white and black side, is just kind of just continued for generations. It's this very stuck area, it seems like.
Well, and probably people who have enough, who've gotten enough education or earned enough whatever, moved up professionally, have probably left Monroe.
Right, but I don't think that's that many, because even, I guess you would be an example, but the reason you left is...
I wasn't from there.
You weren't from there, and certain things transpired. I mean, quite honestly, we'll get into this in a second, but, like, there's a very good chance if things had gone better in your personal relationships that you could still be there. And and even if you look on my dad's side of my family, my siblings who are highly intelligent and very well educated, they're still there. For two of the three. And my dad, who's, for all of his flaws, is a well-educated and intelligent person. And my grandparents, who were well-educated and intelligent people, they certainly had the capacity to leave, or the openness of mind to leave, awareness of the outside world to leave, and yet they still stay there. So I don't even necessarily think it's like you attain some sort of academic achievement or awareness of the outside world and you're like, oh, I can get out of here. There's something very strange about being in places like that, I've discovered, that, like, keeps you trapped in. And so whether you come from money, you stay. Everyone just kind of seems like they stay in their rut. You either grew up in poverty and stay in that poverty. You grew up in affluent hands from kind of the old money that exists there, and you kind of just continue that tradition. But in that same town, it doesn't seem like there's very many people leaving.
Well, when you go, though, it's also a very pretty place to visit.
It's very quaint.
It's got boulevards. It's flat. You could ride bicycles all over everywhere. There's a river. It also happens, unfortunately, to be one of the highest tumor registries, or used to be in the U.S. because of all the pollution in Louisiana. So there's some negatives for me.
It also has the highest crime rate of any city in the United States. I forget what the exact... essentially, it's the most dangerous small city in the United States. I forget what the exact standard is, but it's like the most amount of violent crime of any city under, like, 500,000 people or something like that. I forget the exact statistic. So it's very weird. It does very much have, like, this southern charm to it. It's very, like, quaint and homey.
Antebellum homes.
Yeah.
And, it's really pretty.
But it also has this very deep poverty to it. Mm-hmm. And it just seems both sides just kind of like, oh, this is where I am.
And I think people who have the means and really there are people who probably really love living there.
Yeah.
And so,
I can see that.
Yeah. And also I'm forgetting there's a third area of Monroe, and I can't remember where it's called, but it's down it's on the other side.
Anyway,
but so people that may be where the newer people who are acquiring income and means are living,
right?
And as opposed to the two choices. And I want to go back to West Monroe because I have many friends in West Monroe, so I see a young affluent. When I was a kid, it was somewhat where some of the younger people went too. Like all my college friends went over to West Monroe.
Uh-huh.
Like I mean, and there was a lot of buildup over there of beautiful places to live. In fact, it represents to me the non-traditional, locked-in kind of wealth of Monroe.
Yeah, I get it, and I don't want to be critical, and this is very much like the philosophy that's inspiring my desire to do this podcast interviews with my close family and my closest friends, is that when I initially started this project 2 years ago, when we first did our interview, I felt like I was coming from it from more of like a judgmental place. Like, I wanted to learn, I wanted to like start the project by getting the backstory of where I come from and where the people I love the most come from. But I also feel like a couple years ago I had this idea that like I know best or I know better, and so I'm going to like get this background information about who I am and then kind of run with it. Over the last couple of years, I hope it's through maturation, I've taken a different approach as I'm restarting this project, and more of like, I want to get this background information and kind of figure out who I am. And then rather than like, I don't know, judging or making a statement, I just want to learn. I want to learn from the people around me and then step outside of this immediate vicinity of the people that I know the most, and then go and discover strangers and people with different perspectives and different ways of viewing the world, and learn from them about just like what it means to be a human being and how they are living their lives and things like that. But I will say, like, one of the lessons I am learning, and certainly one of the impetuses that's really inspiring me to do this project, and then ultimately where this project is going to go, is me traveling outside of this country and hopefully interviewing people outside of this country, specifically in Latin America to begin with, is kind of this Monroe symptom that we're discussing. That, I don't know, maybe it's a psychological flaw on my part, and maybe it's part of the OCD that I've talked about in other episodes, and we'll talk about in this interview. Like this obsession with like turning over every rock and having to discover, like, not being able to leave stones unturned, and I have to look around every corner and check everything. I don't know. There's this constant impulse to like not stay still in one place, be it like in a relationship, be it in one geographical location, be it in a single profession. Like there's this constant impetus to like change and do something different and look and travel and explore. And that is influenced in a lot of ways. I think part of it is the OCD, but I think part of it is this Monroe symptom that we're discussing, where it's like I see these people and I look at people in Monroe and I can understand like the people that grew up in poverty. It's like, damn, I feel really bad for you. Like, you have no example to follow of like outside of this, you know, town that you've lived in, or this kind of closed life that you've grown up in. But then I see people of means, or people with education, or people with worldly awareness that stay in the same place. And it's not even necessarily a geographic thing, or stay in the same like lifestyle or same routine. And I'm just like, damn. And once again, I'm trying not to, from the past I would do it from a judgmental perspective, like, damn, what the fuck are you doing, man? Like, why don't you like try something new or creative or different with your time here on Earth? Now I'm taking a different approach. I'm trying to take a different approach where I'm like, okay, like if that's what makes you happy and satisfied and like actualizes a human being, cool. And maybe I certainly haven't lived like this like blissful existence. You know, I feel like I'm constantly going through some sort of psychological or emotional turmoil, and for various reasons. And so it's not like I can sit back and judge people and be like, you should be living the way I'm living. Like, look how happy and stable I am. That's certainly not the case. So what I'm trying to do now is learn from these people and look like, okay, well, shit, maybe you are happy living like this in kind of a very traditional way. But I just do want to use those lessons to influence the path I take going forward. So maybe it is. Maybe I do need to learn, like, nah, this is the best way to live life. To, like, you know, pick a path or pick a place, pick a path, start a family, move forward. But right now, even with these lessons I'm learning, and this interview process is part of that, I haven't been able to quite, like, resign. I don't want to say resign. That has a negative connotation. Choose that lifestyle. So I don't know. I look at people in Monroe and people staying in the same place, and it's kind of inspired me. Not to say that what they're doing is wrong or inferior or anything, but I look at that and I see that and I think, okay, I know right now, at least who I am right now as a 30-year-old man, that I don't want to live my life that way. I do want to, while I'm young and capable of doing so, I do want to just, I don't know, make mistakes, take risk, act on my impulse to travel and turn over these stones. So anyway, that was I digress now, but...
No, but as you're saying that, so I'm thinking about why you would live in Monroe, because when I visited in June, I thought, maybe I could come live here. Caroline has that beautiful...
My half-sister.
Yes, Barbara loves it there. It's a nice, easy place to live. So if you are from there and if you are comfortable there and your family is there, there's everything that you could want there for some people. There is everything. It's not, as you said, if circumstances hadn't led, I might still be living there. For one thing, I'm a more easily satisfied person. Some of this, even though the turn over your stone and the seeking of experiences you guys might attribute to me, honestly, I don't. I think I'm a more complacent person. I don't think I am as, well, maybe courageous is the word I would use, but at least seeking of, some of that's come from the people that I've, like your daddy, probably my attraction to your dad not only was just your dad, but the fact that he liked to do other things. So he added a diversity to my life that I didn't add myself. Mm-hmm. So, and then if you think about, okay, you'd probably embrace someone's choice to live in, say, an ashram or,
join a cult.
Well, no, but you know what I'm saying. You would see that as some spiritual choice at least I would. So what is to say that living in Monroe, I mean, I'm just going with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because I'm also thinking some of my statements are judgmental, but they're judgmental based on, because of my reaction when I was 16, 17, 18, even, well, up until I was 30 years old when I left. All of it was based on never quite fitting in there because I was from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're from there, you fit in and that's where you belong. So, and why is living in this suburb, this neighborhood of Martin's Landing, superior to the people who've chosen to live in Monroe? And for me, and I'm going to answer this myself, the difference is that I can find people that I can have conversations with about types of thought like race unity, spiritual growth. I found the Baha'i faith here. I found, yoga and Buddhism, and I
there's a greater diversity of thought here in suburban Atlanta than there is.
And I can love. There's many people I love who are very conservative people, and there are many people I love who are very liberal people, and then in the middle, and there's people from all over the world. So, but yet there's a difficulty in Atlanta because of distance between all of us, the traffic. I can't get on my bicycle and ride around the entire city if I want to. So if I could put some diversity of thought, and there may be diversity of thought, I just think I think it's more hidden maybe. Mm-hmm. Then Monroe would be a perfectly nice place. It's a little bit hot for me, mm-hmm. but you know what I'm saying? Totally. It's a lovely place if if everybody lived together harmoniously in diversity, and then I'd be totally,
Yeah.
So
continue that. So pick up where we left off in terms of your experience with Monroe. So you go to Northeast at the time, mm-hmm. University of Louisiana Monroe, and you had offers and
so I didn't do those. And I mean, and you have to think too, in that time period, those weren't on the internet. Those were coming to me in the mail. They weren't schools I applied to. Literally, I guess I think I got like a 33 on the ACT, and that just kicked off even back then when things weren't connected, people writing me letters, calling mm-hmm. me on the phone. But anyway, I stayed at Northeast.
Talk about your decision to stay at Northeast, what that was influenced by, and then continue to talk about your experience being at Northeast. I'm going to go pee outside real quick as you do this. But keep going. I don't want to interrupt your flow of thought.
Well,
why did you stay at Northeast? What was the thinking behind that?
Just because I didn't think we had the means to send me anywhere else, and I wasn't going to place that burden on my mom. No one really offered that opportunity to me from the family. Also, we were just still in kind of a crisis situation. It had only been a year since my parents separated, or a year and a half when all those things started coming through. I don't know. I just felt like my choice was to be there. I really guess what I really, really wanted to do. I had always thought I would be a physician. I think I'm supposed to be some type of healer. And so, I think the reason I even chose psychology, like I said, professors wanted me to do math or science. And I would have done science if we'd been in Baton Rouge instead of Monroe, and I could have gone to medical school. I would have just gone to medical school. But we were in Monroe and at Louisiana. University, and so psychology. I had an interest in philosophy. I had an interest in science. I'm good at mathematics. I just like thinking and analyzing, and so psychology sort of embraced all the disciplines into one. It was a semi-science, as some of my professors said to me. And so I just did everything I could to create a challenging curriculum. I had several minors, and anytime I heard a course was hard, I took it. And then they offered me a graduate assistantship, like when I was like a senior, and so I just went straight into the master's program. That was a clinical pre-doctoral program, 60 hours, and so I was planning just to then, at that point, apply to a PhD program. And Ronnie, I was dating a man at that point, and he and I had decided to try living together, and we did that for about 6 months before I realized that relationship wasn't going to be what I thought it was going to be. A little bit more confining in his expectations for who I would be. And
confining, you mean like misogynist?
I guess so. And so we broke up, but then we had sort of a makeup.
This is a great story.
Kind of a makeup sex situation. A few months after we broke up, not even a makeup, just sort of I'm sorry, we can't get back together. Anyway, but then about 6 weeks later, I realized I was pregnant from that event, unplanned and unprepared for. And so I knew that my family, I had to make a choice because I knew it was really, really going to impact my grandparents. Those were the people I was most concerned about because they had definite views of how people should be, and they also had a very kind of idealistic image of me personally. And I think I was very important, and I was going to compromise other people's perceptions of me as well as their perceptions of our family. But I can't think, besides maybe being a physician, well, that would be second to wanting to be a mom. And so I very carefully didn't say anything to anyone because I'm pretty sure my mom would have wanted me to get an abortion. And so I waited, because back then you could only get an abortion first trimester. And I waited very carefully. And Uncle Jay, who commented on the size of my breast when we were at the beach, and it was totally innocent, clueless, but like, when the hell did you get so big up top? Yes. Because I just looked so horrified, and my mom looked at me, and anyway, it kind of but it was already into the second trimester, so I was fine. And then she had a discussion with Ronnie, who was very happy to get married, I think. And I really thought we would be fine. I mean, I figured we could work out any of those issues that I had. And I had already received a job offer. I wasn't quite through with graduate school, but I'd already received a job offer just because. And so I had accepted that, so I knew I had, could be myself and do my own thing, as well as be married. And I think Johnny was quite happy to have that extra income too, so he didn't have any objections to that. And anyway, so we were married for a period. We were married until Katie was born, and then about 6 weeks after Katie was born, he got really angry because he had gone to see his parents, and my mom had come by, and I had gone to the movie with her and Sean and taken Katie to the movie. And I mean, Kay was little, but she was just sleeping in my arms in the movie, and I was breastfeeding, so I mean, it was just easy to take an infant. And we came home, and he was really angry, and he lost his temper and threw Uncle Sean.
He was angry because you went without him or didn't tell him, or?
Yeah, back then it wasn't like cell phones. Hey, you text somebody, hey, I'm going to such and such. If he was out somewhere away from a phone, there was no way to reach him.
Right.
And so I just I think I left him a note. Hey, I'm going to go to the movie with Mom. I think it was just real. My mom and I were close. You have to understand, my mom wasn't my mom. After my parents got divorced, I was in this weird relationship with my mom where I was kind of like her partner, almost like her spouse, because
Has that changed much?
I definitely was her. I also went to school with her. We drove to school together. We drove home together. People thought she was my sister at school. She looks really young. Things that she's doesn't like to do, like, mechanical stuff, I'm pretty good at. So, I mean, I really did serve a role as the other half of her. And I think it's always
You're
been...
like a lesbian couple.
Yes. And I think it's always been hard for her to accept me having a strong relationship with another person. And even including you guys, it's part of it. I mean, she loves everybody.
Seems like Ronnie was having trouble accepting the fact that you were...
Ronnie's a pretty much more controlling person, and I don't think I'm the only person who would say that. I think he was married before me, and she left for the same reasons. And then he's married to Cindy, and Cindy seems able to subjugate her needs to his.
Getting crazy with the pro.
Yeah.
You're getting it.
Names,
Cindy's
his third wife. Yeah, I mean,
current wife.
Yeah. So, and I'm not. And
so there was conflict there between your mom / lesbian partner and your husband. Both of them were jealous of one another, and eventually you had to choose.
Well, and he acted in a semi-violent manner, not towards me, but he did throw a piece of equipment across the room.
Equipment?
Uncle Sean's boombox. And Uncle Sean was quite innocent in his. I think he might have had it on or something, but. That I really just used that because I was mad at him about yelling at me about going to the movie with my mom, and I just used it as a reason. Like, I didn't want to be there. I mean, I didn't want this behavior. I could feel the control tightening in all the time, and he wanted to move to Bastrop, and he wanted to live on a little piece of land, and I think I would have been kind of locked into a really narrow environment. I loved his parents. I love his sister. His sister was one of my closest friends. They're all dear, dear people. And Ronnie could be anything. He's a bright, intelligent, creative. He's artistic like Katie. He read books even though he never finished. I mean, he went to college. He just didn't finish college. There was something that I feel like sometimes his self-esteem with regard to what he could be, or if he ever questioned that he was going to be what he thought he could be, he would quit. And he's put himself in this small world.
Well, it wasn't like this relationship was destined for success in the beginning. I mean, the only reason y'all were married in the first place is because you had this makeup sex after having broken up. So the relationship, I think you'd already recognized prior to getting pregnant that this relationship wasn't going in.
But I'm capable, if you recognize my relationship, of I'm maybe not capable of subjugating my needs like Cindy has been able to do by like shutting my mouth about stuff that I think is wrong.
Uh-huh.
But I can definitely put other people's needs ahead of my own.
That sounds healthy.
Well, I know. But
So you were capable of subjugating...
except I had my other spouse over here who needed me too. Had I not had another spouse, I probably would have stayed married to the first spouse. Or the second spouse.
Your other spouse being your mom.
Yes.
Your main home.
So if my first spouse had objected to me being married to my second spouse, I probably could have. But I'm totally fine. I hope Ronnie's totally fine.
Yeah, it sounds like he's doing great. We'll get into that in a different interview. Actually, we may have gotten that in the Kay's interview. So anyway, that relationship, destined, in my opinion, for failure from the beginning, only lasted 6 weeks. So then you were left.
Well, it lasted more than 6 weeks. We were married before that.
Oh, you said 6 weeks after Katie was born. Oh, 6 weeks after.
And then we actually stayed married till Katie was 4 years old.
But you weren't together.
We weren't living together. Uh-huh. But we saw each other every weekend. We did all his visitation we did with each other, with Katie. But then in the interim, he met Cindy, and he started dating Cindy, and Cindy's a dear and wonderful person, and he just came and said, do you mind if we get divorced? I think I'd like to marry Cindy. And I was like, no, great, that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. And so he did. And she's been a wonderful stepmother, and he's been a wonderful dad. Until he and Katie hit heads. So, and then I met your dad. So
real quick, though, let's get to that. So let's put that as our next checkpoint. But let's go into a little bit of detail in the interim. How is it being a single mom now with Katie? You're just one kid.
Well, at first I lived with Mom because I left there, packed my stuff up, and went to Mom's house. And then I just started to feel stifled there, not being able to be anything but her daughter / spouse. And So Kate and I moved into there's an apartment complex there that's really old apartments, but very cool. Upstairs townhouses near the river with a big open area of play for the kids behind a church with a great playground next to a park. And so that's the only place I was willing to move. I didn't have money to buy a house at that point. So I put myself on that waiting list, and when one of the places opened, Katie and I moved there. And that's where we were living until we moved to Atlanta. And let's see, in that interim, my grandparents, Mom left at some point to move back to Atlanta. My grandparents were still in Monroe. I wanted to stay near them. I also had my job. I had my, things there. Katie's things were there. Ronnie was there for her other grandparents. So I didn't see a need to follow or to do anything. And I was okay. As I said, I could be okay there. My grandfather broke a hip and passed away in the interim, and that was a huge loss. He was a definite grandfather and father. And my grandmother was there and struggling to be by herself as well. But Kate and I integrated ourselves fairly well into the society. I think, Kate was always a bright kid, so she was always with, a good group of kids. And I don't think I quite fit in still, because now not only am I from a different place, I'm also a single parent, and most people were married. Very few people were divorced. I can't even really think of anyone who's divorced. But,
this is early 80s.
Yeah, we were okay. I had Katie's closest friends, mothers, and were good friends of mine. And, I didn't get invited to, couples parties and stuff like that. And then the guys, all the people that I went to school with, they were, we had a lot of mutual respect for each other. We were all especially the graduate school people, and so we all had friendships and things like that. And but I probably had a somewhat isolated social life. I would do things with my work people, which several of those guys and girls or women were from the graduate school, because we were all psych people over in Ouachita Parish. And I might go to lunch or something with some of the moms, but not anything in the evenings. My primary friendship would be Barbara, who was still single, and we had been friends since my first year in college, her senior year in high school. And I was working I wanted Katie to be involved in church, and so I took her with my grandparents to church. And so initially I just would send her to Sunday school, and I would wait for her and just do my own Bible study kind of stuff, or spiritual study, whatever teaching I wanted to look at, sitting on the bench outside the Sunday school classrooms, because I just didn't quite fit into the more conservative Sunday school classes. And just let me back up 1 second. When I was in high school, I did attend Methodist Youth Fellowship and those Sunday school classes, but a couple times I was in those events, especially the social ones, not the class ones. Some racist remarks were made, and not criticized by the adults, and actually even laughed at a couple times by the adults. And that's what actually made me stop attending anything of my own with regard to religious. With Katie, I felt comfortable letting a little kid go to an organized Sunday school class, and that's what she did, and I just stayed outside so that I was aware of what was happening to her there. And then
there's no risk whatsoever in letting a toddler be indoctrinated into racist thoughts. It's a good idea.
No, she didn't have racist thoughts. It was just Jesus stuff. I saw the curriculum. I knew what was going on. The racist stuff popped up in the adolescent pieces of it. And these were people I also knew. I also knew the superintendent of Sunday schools, who was a good friend of my grandparents, and I don't know that she might not have believed in separation of races, but so did my grandparents.
Clarify that again real quick.
I'm sure both sets of my grandparents believed in racial segregation. Yes, in terms of at least marriage.
Right.
But anyway, that particular person who's a friend of my grandparents came to me and asked me if I would be in charge of it. Since I was sitting there, did I want to go to a Sunday school class? No, thank you. Would you like to take over the Sunday school classes?
Great segue, Mom. Keep it going. You're doing great. This is a perfect segue in terms of the narrative of this interview. Keep going.
So I took over the Sunday school. I took over the preschool and the kindergarten Sunday school classes, and I taught the preschool, the 4-year-old preschool, and then supervised the others. And so the last year I taught, Katie and Caroline, who is your half-sister from your dad, were in that kindergarten class together. And Preston who's your half-brother, was in my 4-year-old preschool class. And that's really how I met your dad. He came to pick the kids up, and he would come to my door. Well, so when Sunday schools ended, for any children not picked up by their parents yet, they would come to stay in my 4-year-old preschool class because I let the other teachers all go to church.
Are you saying that my father would drop off his 3 children at Sunday school and then arrive particularly late to pick them up?
Yes, I would.
Shocking.
Your father would drive them up. He would let them out at the door, which my classroom door was right by that door. So I would supervise how everybody got to their Sunday schools too. That was my other job, was kind of like guard to make sure everybody went where they were supposed to go. But not that many kids got dropped off. Your 3 siblings did. So Caroline was easy. She and Katie were waiting for each other. Preston was in my room. And Hugh Jr. had to go down to a different hallway because he was older. And most typically he would head that way as directed. But about somewhere in the middle of my Sunday school class, I would realize that he was hanging out in the hallway outside of my room. And at one point, he and I had a conversation. Well, I came out to see him, and he darted into a closet and hid. And so I went out of the classroom and opened up the closet door and said, "Hey, what you doing?" And he said, "I'm sitting in here." I said, "Well, I know. Why are you sitting in here?" "Don't you know I'm the worst boy in Sunday school?" And I said, "No, I didn't know that." "How do you know you are?" And anyway, from that point on, we were really good friends. And I don't know, that's actually when I also met your dad, probably when he came in to get, I had Hugh Jr. come in my room too, so he came in to get everybody in. We had a little bit of a conversation about that. But yes, he would get everybody dressed, he'd drop them off, felt very strongly about that, then he'd get there, it'd be late, and he'd grab them and go to sit them and make them sit in church.
It's almost as if he never wanted to be a father, and then he would take advantage of every opportunity to have someone else, either an individual or organization, raise his children for him.
No, but he actually is really pretty religious. Well, one of the first things your dad and I did
was nothing to do with the comment I just made. That is really just a foreshadowing for events to come. But go ahead.
But it is. He really did think they should go to church.
Okay.
And he still goes to church himself now.
Yeah.
He does. He does.
Sings in the choir and stuff.
Yeah, and he used to sing in that choir. He does feel strongly. I don't get... Well, and I probably...
It's also like there's some sort of mental blockage where those religious messages aren't really influencing his character as a human
Perhaps
being.
we just need to think about there's best sides of him, because you've got to understand, too, I saw some best sides of him. And so he and I studied the Bible together. We had an outline, and he would read it, and I would read it at my house. He would read it at his house. We would have discussions about it. He's a wonderful business person. He's a fantastic musician. He would never premeditatedly hurt another human being. He would neglectfully hurt another human being, but he would never consciously hurt. And he's very accepting of everyone. He might not defend you or stick up for your rights, but he would accept. He's not. I don't consider him racist in the traditional sense of racism. He was raised in a racist society, so he probably doesn't think about everything that he does. But in terms of his really embracing of everything, he does. Sometimes he thinks it's for his own amusement, but I don't think he's critical of anyone.
Right.
So anyway, we met outside of Sunday school. We didn't I had this weird feeling about him, which your sister now thinks is because we were married to in some former life. Your half sister Caroline,
my older half sister.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they're all Morgan's your only full sister, but anyway, your sister.
So just to interject real quick, just to lay the ground. I think you did, but just to make it clear real quick. So, you're bringing you're single mom at the time. You're bringing your only daughter to Sunday school. You're now asked to teach Sunday school because you're chilling outside the class, reading the Bible, doing your own independent Bible study, whatever. You start teaching Sunday school. This guy, Hugh Youngblood, is dropping off his kids, his 3 children, 2 boys, 1 girl, between the ages of
4 or 5 and 9 or 10.
Between
9. Probably 4 and 9.
Between 4 and 9 at Sunday school every Sunday. You have interaction with them either in your class or extracting them from the closet. And, he arrives late to pick them up. You interact with him. And then what you're about to say is something I've heard you say before is like...
when he came to the door, something in my brain went, oh my God, you're going to marry this person. And we probably said hello. I also always felt extremely, to all of them I felt very attached and protective. I felt very protective of Hugh Jr. the minute he told me he was the worst boy in Sunday school. Caroline has just always felt like somebody I was very comfortable with. It's just like she loved me and I loved her. And then Preston was the same way.
The youngest.
The youngest. They used to say, like, I was the only person Preston wouldn't cuss in front of. I mean, I heard him cuss one time when he was in the bathroom.
How old was he?
He was living here then. And I didn't believe them that he would cuss. I really thought they were just all being exaggerating and being mean to their little brother. And then I actually heard him let go one day, but I wasn't present. I
have this image of the kids at the time, maybe not Caroline, my older sister. She kind of seems like she... was a little more well-behaved than the other two. But of my two brothers, I have this image of both of them, especially Hugh Jr., the eldest, of the kid from Toy Story. I think his name's Sid, who's in the backyard, like, blowing up all the toys and shit and strapping them to bottle rockets and, like, torturing the action figures. Like, that's the image I have of these kids.
Yeah, I don't think he would hurt a living thing, but yes, one time I went over there, they were trying to skateboard off the roof of the house.
Like that kind of behavior.
I'm not teasing. He and Wade were on top of the house. They had decided they were going to skateboard down this is your dad's home, not mine.
Right. And this is in large part because these kids you're raising your daughter by yourself, but I mean, you're kind of this angelic human being, in my opinion. Like, I think you're very well-adjusted, very morally grounded, spiritually human being. You're like this monastic type figure. My dad, on the other hand, is,
But I was attracted to. Right. It's like, how angelic can I be?
Well, I mean, if there's one thing I've learned throughout this interview series, if there's one lesson I've learned, especially interviewing my close friends from high school and college, who are the vast majority of them involved in either married or involved in serious romantic relationships, is that opposites attract. I think that's a very real thing. And I've very limited experience with committed romantic relationships, like long-term committed romantic relationships, but with the very small number of girls that I have been involved with for an extended period of time, that's been the case as well. I've been involved with people that have a personality that's very opposite of mine. So I think that's a very real thing. And you may say that, and you know better than I do, that my father has some sort of moral character to him, or some sort of moral compass that guides him in some way. But I think we can both agree, like, not a great parent, or that certainly was never a priority of his. And it seems like, in my reflection on his reproduction, that it kind of just happened by accident, and he was left, with, we don't even know how many children, quite honestly. And it seems like his attitude towards having offspring was, well, shit, they're here, like, fuck, what do I do now? Mm-hmm. And so this is where you found him, right? You found him having come out of his first marriage, and he was left from that first marriage with these 3 children who he was dropping off at Sunday school. And do you want to get into the details of that first marriage and then take y'all's relationship from there? Well,
his first wife, I think he was extremely in love with Julia. She's a beautiful person. She, they just had a single life together. There was drug use, there was alcohol use. He had a rock and roll band. He booked other rock and roll bands. They had a very just free and experimental life. Mm-hmm. And then she got pregnant. And then I think she also has either borderline or schizoaffective or schizophrenia, something it's a question because she's no longer alive. And that was a science that's still questionable today.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in more detail, because I have gone prior to this. I have gone and interviewed my father, because I've never really had a relationship with him, so to get to know him. So that interview will be posted. Then I have also interviewed each of my 3 half siblings, his children, and so we'll get into more detail about that as well. But I do want to interject here. There is some question. I don't know if I'm drawing this conclusion or if this was brought up explicitly in the interviews, that perhaps ultimately her psychological demise, which I would like you to touch on right now, perhaps was induced by that partying and drug use that you're referring to. And that would make sense based on kind of the psychological struggles that my siblings on that side of the family have had as well. Could have been induced by heavy drug use.
They've been exposed to a lot of drug use and used drugs themselves at a relatively early
So it's unclear like how much of this is just like purely genetic and would have happened regardless, or how much of this is certainly there was the genetic predisposition for mental illness that was brought about by substance abuse. So.
I suspect, as you're saying, there's a combination effect.
Yeah.
Maybe certain events. And living with your dad alone creates great stress and fear. And he used to say to me, you just need to quit being so afraid. And I think that was a wonderful statement to make, truly, because I do think, as you know, I worry about everything and try to control. And the more unstable something is, then the more you try to control, especially when you've got 5 children and you have suddenly become the sole provider for all those children too, even though he was living here. And I've jumped ahead because let me back up so that you know. But anyway, I just imagine Julia's life as being chaotic. His first wife. And then they've been involved in all these drugs and alcohol. And again, I don't know how much of that there was. I know there was in the early parts of the relationship. And then after they got married, perhaps things stabilized more. And then she certainly found herself pregnant. Hormonal changes also could impact all those genetic predispositions. And I suspect probably some of her drug and alcohol use may not have even been present once she got pregnant. I really don't know what her protective factors will be. But I, as a person, would try to provide the best environment for the fetal person I'm providing for. So I'm hoping that she was able to stop that, and Hugh Jr. wasn't exposed or Carolina Breaston to those things. But I don't know. But I'm hoping. And they had a very beautiful home, and they were part of Monroe society. They belonged to the country club and to the church, and they were. So I think that things settled down, and they had. I mean, he was voted Young Businessman of the Year. Now again, he has a lot of political and social connections that may have been an impetus for that, but I do think he was a very successful person. So I think their life was much better. And so let's go from the best case scenario, which is all of that was pre-children. They get married. There's this better environment established. But things happen for Julia that are hormonal and kick in with some of the other things that are present. And Caroline and Hugh Jr. Caroline said this to me, and Hugh Jr. had said this to me before, but more recently she said it. Their mom was a much better, more stable person when he was little, and then as with the second baby, and you will see this in research too, women have a greater impact of the hormones and the changes that happen, and she became less and less stable. She's also probably dealing with more and more responsibility and greater stress, and your father's not able to come up with he doesn't even know how to do that part. He didn't know how to be the parent. He knows how to be these other things that he's been involved with in terms of the business and the rock and roll, and I know he's still using because he never stopped using. I mean, pharmaceuticals may have been like prescription kind of medication that he's using at that point, but still it wasn't really what a doctor was prescribing for him. And then she has the third child, and Caroline, I know in her interview will talk about being fearful of her own mom when she's a little teeny person. And so that's the people that I found. And so in Sunday school, I meet your father. I had this feeling. I already am in love with the children. The next thing that happens is I'm sitting at my house in the Garnier Apartments, and I'm on the front porch because there's that big grassy area, and Katie's outside playing with a friend, and your dad walks by, out of the blue. I've not seen him, except at church, and he is coming home from his store on his way, and his house is fairly nearby where the apartments are. But a lady who had been a customer of his for a long time, who is an elderly person who didn't drive, had called him. And this is the good part. This is reflective of who your father would be in terms of doing for other people. She called and said she needed a roll of stamps. So he said, okay. And he kept rolls of stamps in, the store. So on his way home, he stopped, parked in the parking lot of our apartment complex, walked down to hand her this roll of stamps. I'm sure he was going to bill her for the roll of stamps, but he did billing for people. People would do stuff on credit. And he then stopped and talked to me, actually came in, I think, and I don't know, had a Coke or something, and we had a conversation. And then I can't remember if he asked me out right then. I think he did. Maybe he said, would you like to get dinner sometime? And I said, yes. And well, I don't remember from then on. I can't remember if the first dinner was at my house or I think actually he may have come over and we may have eaten it at my house. And then the next time I remember eating with him was when he asked me to come eat at their house after church. And I got there with Katie, and the kids were all gathered around this big counter island thing in the middle with their dad, all of them kneeling on little stools with the aprons on, excited. I mean, they were having a legitimate interaction with your father, a creative thing. They were creating steak tartare on the middle thing, and they were sitting all there eating raw hamburger meat. And I'm like, oh! But, I mean, that was just my lack of exposure. They were like, oh, no, Daddy, it needs more rosemary, or, oh, and I'm like, what is happening? Because they were all little chefs. And that, your dad is that wonderful artistic, your sister's got that aspect. I think you have that aspect. My regret for you not being exposed to your father is the music. They're all wonderful, fantastic musicians, artists, and, they're just amazing people. Just addictively screwed up. Mm-hmm. Except for Caroline, who's been able to extricate herself from that.
Yeah, and I see a lot of these characteristics in myself that you've kind of outlined over the last several minutes. The addiction aspect, which I'll go into kind of, I think, an episode where I just kind of do my own just ranting. The addiction aspect I see in myself. I also very much see like what you're talking about, where he does have a strong moral compass or a concern for other people, and he would never intentionally hurt someone, and especially when it comes to like romantic relationships, but can be neglectful or like unaware or unconcerned. But it's not intentional. It's just like, I don't know if it's like a self-centeredness or just the way our brain works, where we're just not aware of like how our actions are affecting other people. I see that in myself as well, that like I think I have a strong moral compass and concern for other people, and if like someone needed help, if I needed to like run into a burning building to save someone, I'd certainly do it. But like, with the people that, be it my romantic relationships or like my close family, like I may do things that aren't like egregious, but that are like neglectful or potentially hurtful out of like lack of concern or awareness. I see that in myself, perhaps to a lesser degree, or less detrimental in myself. Perhaps because I don't have kids, but I see that in myself as well. So it's really weird, and this is part of the reason I really wanted to go and interview him over the last couple of years that Impetus came about, because I did start to see, based on the limited information I did have about him that you've told me through the years, I did start to recognize like, oh shit, I'm kind of like that, even though I've never had any relationship with him ever. It's not like he impacted who I am as a human being through our interaction relationship we had, but yet, well, through nature, it seems like I exhibit very similar characteristics, both the good and bad.
If people are in pain, people are in a high level of stress, people, in your dad's case and in probably your case and Hugh Jr.'s case, if you have obsessive thoughts, it's difficult to be your best self. I mean, Morgan's stressed out and she's more irritable than she normally is. Just think about that. I certainly feel that same thing in myself. And Myra said to me, don't you believe in evil? Myra's being a friend of mine the other day. She said, don't you believe in evil? And I said, I think about every human being as being a baby. And then we end up being where we are based on circumstances. And so, no, I think every person is born pure. And I think that if we get offended by each other's actions and we get our feelings hurt, or we feel reactive and angry about stuff. But if we stopped and think, we don't know where the action of the other person is coming from, and we try to have thought and perspective and give people benefit of the doubt, we would just have a lot of we would reduce our reactivity, we would reduce our responsiveness, if we just stopped and did the Thich Nhat Hanh, took a breath. Mm-hmm. And step back and think, what's happening? Why is this happening? What's happening for this person? And give that person compassion for their... I have found, like even at the gym, I have now engaged in conversations and just smiling at people. I smile. My thing is I smile at every human being. And the gift of aging is that as you age, people don't think it's flirting. People just see it as, oh, my mom's smiling at me. Mm-hmm. And so now I can, and people just smile back, and there's just love and gratitude in their eyes that you've smiled at them. And now people that have not ever talked to me at the gym, I thought, well, my old reflex reaction is, oh, these people are stuck up and they have some kind of judgment about me. They don't. they're just quiet, shy people, or they're people who don't think anyone else wants to talk to them. And I mean, if I would take the time to stop and be present and to give my time to every human being, I mean, it could go on infinitely. I could have 1 million people in this house every day. Or not 1 million, but, I mean, as many people as I wanted, because people just want each other. And the thing in my meditation, what I do, and I don't know, I think this is one of my memory issues. I don't know where I got this from, but I think it might have come from the Spiritual Living Center. I do the chakra. I do the Yoga Nidra where I'm doing my body thing, but when I get to the breathing part of it, I imagine the chakras and the as well as the organs associated with that, and I try to heal my own self as I go up. But when I get to the solar plexus chakra, I say, God is peace, I am peace, I'm serene, tranquil, and quiet, I'm in harmony with all life. When I get to the heart chakra, God is love, I am love, or sometimes what I do really is God is love, we are love. And then to say, today, I will let God's love within me shine forth to every person I meet, because I know that God is loving me through every person that I meet, and God is loving them through me. And if that's the way you approach everything, how can anything be evil? Now, I am blessed that no one's ever tortured me or put me, because I know people do evil and horrible things to each other. But every person was a little baby. Every person was Elliot. Every person looked at other people with joy, and, and then we just have things happen to us, and we get corrupted, and we get disconnected from the source of whatever the source is.
Get into that. We're going aside here, but I want to keep this momentum going with the path that we're on right now. What is your concept of God, or there being a being higher than ourselves? Because I was kind of indoctrinated into this notion by you that there is a God, that there is something higher than ourselves, and you touched on your involvement with the Baha'i faith, and I guess if there was any sort of religious indoctrination on my part as a child, it was the Baha'i faith, which I, long story short, essentially believes in the unity of all of the major faiths around the world and throughout history. And so I kind of grew up with that notion coming from you. As I've grown into adulthood, I have major reservations, certainly about organized religion in general, and then more specifically about whether or not there is an existence of any sort of being higher than us. I don't know at this point. It's much like the philosophy I'm taking with this interview series. I don't know the best way to live life, or the way to happiness, or stability as a human being. And so if I can't even figure out the right job to take, I'm certainly not going to speculate on whether or not there's an ultimate creator. But what is your take on that? I know you've always you touched on how you I guess your initial concept of a higher being was with Christianity, because you're raised in the South. So you touched on that in your early years, how you were involved in Christian churches. But how has your concept of God or whatever developed throughout your life, and where do you stand now?
Well, for me, the word God, probably, I use God, but I also don't want to use God because it feels limiting, because people have attached their own meanings to what that word means. And in Christianity, it's this father figure that seems personified. And I think personhood is a state of being that our souls, and whatever souls are, whatever fragment of energy of, I don't know, it's like some ethereal mesh that we've gotten fragmented from, and we come down for this experience, to have this experience, except for then I don't understand why God needs to have an experience. Whatever God is, whatever universal consciousness, that word, universal consciousness, universal being, universal, but even universal is not big enough. I can't define God. I know some of my really strong Christian friends feel like they have this strong personal relationship, and so for them to think of it as a father figure or works best for them. And in that, I think, comes the same surrender that there is in Buddhism. In Buddhism, they talk about that if you can actually surrender your being to feel like you are totally, that this is some kind of altered universe, altered state of consciousness that really isn't the true reality. and that if you just surrender and go with the present moment and know that there's something beyond this that we're connected to, and I can't define God. I really more feel it. And there was a statement the other day I was reading in a book, and it said, feel the feelings. And honestly, Allie, that's all I can say, is I just feel my best when I'm feeling the feelings, sometimes it's almost like tunnel vision. Like right now, I'm starting to lose perspective on the rest of the room, and I see you instead of just seeing everything. And if I stopped talking, I probably would feel that even better, or, when I'm listening to someone else. So, and in little children, I feel I think that's why that is so important to me. I can remember, I've said this to you, I think when I was 12 years old and I was babysitting for my next door neighbor, and she actually had her fourth child, and that baby was laying in that crib, and it was my first real close contact with an infant, as a fairly adult person. I was 12, but still, and just feeling something so pure within that being. And I don't know, I was sitting here waiting for you to come up, and the birds were hopping around in the grass, and so I was just sitting here thinking, oh, this is contemplation. I'm not thinking, I'm not doing, I'm just watching all the robins hop, the blue jay come down, the squirrels scare them all away, all these kinds of things. And I thought, oh, I want to go be with Amelia and Cora, and I want to lay on my tummy and watch the ants crawl in and out of the anthill.
Those are your grandchildren?
Yes. I want to go lay on the side of the granite mountain in Highlands and look at the little sparkling rocks.
With your grandchildren.
Right.
If you're by
Isn't that much more, and Mom will say, what's Alex doing? What's Alex doing? What's he going to do with his life? I'm like, I should have said Alex is going to go lay on his tummy and watch the anthill. I don't know that maybe you can't slow down enough to do that, and what Morty's doing is all of what I've said this to you before. What each path each of you choose is your way of being. And each path takes courage. And I think that's why we shouldn't minimize Monroe. Everyone's path is the path that works for them. Perhaps they haven't thought about doing something outside of the norm, but perhaps, like my friends who are really strong Christians, they found their contentment. They found their knowingness within that realm of being. I don't know what God is.
All right, I'm going to stop there. I'm just having this impulse now. I'll make this a part 1.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
I met your father.
Yep.
Okay, so then after...
You came over, second date was they're making steak tartare at his crib.
Yeah, and we just hung out, and I don't remember any more of the details of that. That's my most... I just was playing with children and seeing them. So you were conceived pretty quickly into that relationship. So
what's quickly?
I don't know. I can't remember what month we actually started dating. Well, no, I do actually, because another event that happened that brought us together. I forgot about this. And this happened before he came to do the stamps. I forgot about that. So I saw him in Sunday school. Then the next thing that happened was Katie and Caroline's birthdays. Their birthdays are 5 days apart in February. And I went by his house to deliver a birthday party invitation to Caroline. We were driving around delivering all the invitations. It's so small. That's the way everybody did it, really. So the first place I stopped was their house because it was close to our house. And your grandmother would always come up from Columbia to watch the kids after school.
His mom.
And while he was at work, and so she was standing out in the driveway with the kids, and I handed her the invitation for the skating rink party, and she said to me, "This is Mimi, very definitely Mimi, doing what she wants you to do, getting you to do what she wants you to do." So she says, "Oh, Caroline's birthday is that same day. I was going to have her birthday party at the skating rink at that same day and time. Do you mind if I just put Caroline's name on this invitation? Because they have all the same friends."
Jesus.
"And do you have any extra invitations for a couple of kids that Katie doesn't know that Caroline will want to invite?" One of them I know was Adrian. Oh, I shouldn't say Adrian's last name, but Adrian. And so I was like, How you feel about that, Katie? kind of looking, but Katie and Caroline both were very excited. So that was totally fine. So we literally sat in the driveway, changed all the invitations from Katie's birthday party to Katie and Caroline's birthday party. Because it probably said, those little kid invitations, Katie's, somebody's, you put in Katie's birthday. And so we just put Ann Caroline's. And then I just delivered all the invitations and the girls had a joint birthday party. And your dad showed up for the very end of that birthday party. So that was actually my second contact with your dad. Then my third contact was when he delivered the stamps to the lady. And that's when he asked me out. I knew there had been 3 contacts before he asked me out, and I couldn't remember what it was. And so that was it. Also, the girls started hanging out a lot together from that point on, too. So, I think even, at that birthday party, say, for example, Ronnie was there. We have pictures of Ronnie roller skating with Katie, holding her hands. But your dad showed up at the very end of the birthday party to make the perfunctory necessary visit. But that's just his level of involvement with kids. He's just not a kid person. Papa even said to me when we got married.
Papa being your grandfather, his
I
father.
hope, or no, maybe he said it to your grandma, to Mimi, and then she said it to me. My biggest worry about Robin and Hugh is I don't know if she realizes how much she's not involved with the kids. Because we would have dates when they went to see their grandparents, and Katie was the only dates we would have by ourselves were when both sets of kids were gone somewhere. And for his 3, that involved being their grandparents took them down to Columbia and on Friday after school. And then for me, it would involve Katie being asked to spend the night with somebody. And then if those 2 things coincided, your dad and I would have a personal date, in which then would involve sleeping with each other. And I was thinking about this because Morgan always fusses at me about the fact that I didn't use contraceptives very much. And one of the...
I didn't use contraceptives very much. That's got to be the quote of the interview.
We did. Okay, so... First of all, I personally am not, but that's one of the things for my heart places me at risk back then, especially I was not allowed
Condoms place you at risk?
No, we always used condoms, but I wasn't responsible for purchasing the condoms. Other people were. And so I was, that's just how it was, Allie.
Okay, whatever.
That is, I can imagine in that generation, in that place that I live, going in and purchasing a box of condoms. I mean, that would have been anyway, so to my knowledge, I thought that we were always using a condom, and I think we did use a condom. And from my understanding, the only time if your father's condoms were pretty ancient. Okay, so I'm just telling you, the only time I know that I can tell you 2 instances when I didn't have use of a condom. One of them was Katie's conception. Okay,
we went over that.
All right. So with you,
we're going as many unprotected sex sessions that you ever had. This will be great for
because I didn't have sex that much. In fact, I was thinking that to this morning. I don't know why this came into my brain. I think it was probably something I saw on TV, and I thought, as many partners as I've had children, basically.
You're fertile.
So anyway, you got conceived sometime in May.
And you started seeing him in February, essentially.
Yeah, beginning of March.
Okay.
That kind of thing.
Needless to say, y'all weren't married.
We were not married.
Okay.
And we weren't having sex that often because we could. I would not sleep with your father because we did travel. We went to South Louisiana and places like that. We would get a hotel room because we would all go together once we were really dating each other
with the kids.
But I made your dad and the boys sleep in one. We'd get a 1-room double bed room, and the girls and I slept in one bed, and your dad and the boys slept in one bed. And I can even remember Hugh Jr. saying to me, "Where are you going to sleep?" the first time we all went, and I said, "With the girls." I mean, I knew at that point.
He was aware.
I knew at that point he'd also been exposed to situations where that had not been the thing. So that's when my eyes started to be a little bit. I wasn't as naive as I had been previously. I started to become aware of things, especially when we were in New Orleans. There were a lot of people that we met and stuff, and it was just different. He had 2 lives, kind of. 3 lives, probably. A Columbia life, a Monroe life, and then a South Louisiana life.
Columbia being the tiny town where he grew up on the plantation. We get into that in the Youngblood interviews. Monroe being the city where I was born, where
his business was and stuff like that. And he went to church and had the country club.
In New Orleans, where he also had business dealings.
Yes, and where it was just totally he let loose kind of life. So, anyway, sometime in June or July, I became aware that I was pregnant again, and I said to him, what do you want to do about this? And he hemmed and hawed and didn't want to take any action. As I said, neglect is usually his thing that he could be accused of in terms of not taking action, not doing any kind of absolute harm. And I let him just hem and haw for a while, and then it got closer and closer to the start of school. And
and haw being like...
Was
he suggesting abortion?
Yeah, but I was like, no. And so I'm like, I'm going to have this baby. I have a job. I have health
Thanks,
insurance.
Morgan. Appreciate it. Much crinkling as possible in the background would be great.
So I was basically, I wasn't telling him he had to get married. I just said, what do you want to do? And he didn't know what he wanted to do. And I said, well, that's kind of my answer. And so I said, I'll just leave you alone about it. But when school starts, I'll have to go to my schools and my boss and tell them the situation and see what they want to do. Probably legally they couldn't do anything, but they were friends. All of them were. And so he couldn't make any kind of decisions when school started, so I just did those things, and everybody was very supportive. And I'm sure they weren't excited, but they were supportive. It wasn't like I was someone's teacher. I was the school psychologist who came in intermittently, and people didn't have to know that much about me.
You're saying the concern is that you were concerned that you were going to be this unmarried pregnant woman at your new job?
Sure.
Okay.
In the South and in the Northern,
that's an issue.
Yeah, there's a Bible Belt, and
right.
It was of concern, but people were wonderful, and it was worked out and fine, and except for the fact that you were late and ended up in intensive care, it would have been okay. I will say that by September, your daddy started to panic, and then he was saying, "Let's get married," and then I said to him, "No." I basically said, if you really had wanted to, I think that you would have been able to react that way earlier. And I said, I've already done what I needed to do, and everything's okay, and I'll be okay, and let's leave it alone. But we continued with our relationship in terms of doing things with the kids, because they were your siblings as well. And that's when my name changed from Robin to Tummy, because I was getting fat and Caroline was, and the kids Hugh Jr. even didn't seem to question that I was pregnant and we weren't married to each other. I was just now their person. And Carrie Jo your grandmother, was the most, your grandfather was pretty supportive.
My paternal grandparents you're referring to.
Yeah. I mean, I think he liked me, and he didn't, and your dad had done enough crazy stuff. They were okay with, this is just one more thing. I think was kind of how they did it. Your grandmother kept trying to say, she thought I was after their money, and I kept thinking, what money? Because, for mine.
You were after their money by getting pregnant?
I guess, and try to get your dad to marry me, except I wasn't trying to get your dad to marry me, but that was just her perspective on things, and she said that a couple of times. And anyway,
She seems like an awesome lady based on my interviews that I've had, that I've done with that side of the family. Yeah. What a fuck.
She just had...
Whatever, I never really knew her. I grew up with this kind of, I guess, idealistic perspective of who she was, because she's your grandmother, right? Like, your grandmother, but kind of seemed like she sucked.
She was manipulative about stuff, and your dad and I might even be still married, but that's okay that we're not, because I think he did, there's some other things without that. Anyway.
Right, so long story short, you get pregnant, my dad wants to get me aborted, then you say no, the pregnancy solidifies past the first trimester, as we talked about.
Your dad's still involved with me. He came to the hospital initially because they had induced labor because you were 2 weeks late. He came to the hospital.
Let me interject real quick. He once he realizes this baby is going to happen, then he suggests marriage. At that point, you're like, listen, if you really wanted to get married, you would have pulled the trigger on this earlier. You were trying to abort this kid a few months ago. And then so you said no marriage. And then I'm about to be born.
And you're about to be born. And as I said, we're still there. They had a baby shower for me. There are pictures of your dad looking very uncomfortable at the baby shower, because it was a couple's baby shower, because, I professionally had as many guy psychology friends as I did, and educational consultants as I did women. It was kind of a mixed group of people. They have to induce labor because you're almost 2 weeks late. He comes with me or met me there. I think he met me there. He Doesn't like needles like you. It makes him very uncomfortable. He was pacing back and forth, especially after the IV started. I think he was probably freaking out. But again, I'm much more knowledgeable about things and mental health issues than I was then. I think I could have worked with your father better had I been more experienced and not as young and just, I mean, he was freaking out.
Right.
And, all I was seeing was, here's this person who can't even
Don't have it on the table. That's what messed up the interview last time.
Who can't sit still long enough to be in the hospital while his child's being born. But I think he just was about to explode. So he said, I got to go to the store. I got to go to the store and see.
This is while you're in labor.
Yeah. I got to go to the store and see, it was like 6 o'clock or almost 6. I need to go make a bank deposit. I was like, fine, just go. Gosh, come back. That's cool. Just go. I'm fine. And then, because I was on Pertussin, the labor started to get really intense, and it was Monroe, and so everyone had gone to dinner. All the nurses were down in some nurses area and having dinner, and there was no one on the floor. But I was very fortunate that the workday ended, and a really good friend of mine and another really good friend of mine were cousins, and they both came together to see me. And one of the cousins was a very close, dear friend, Judy, who died, and that's another story. She was in nursing school, and so when she walked in, they had put a fetal monitor on you, and she looked over and she said, his heart rate has just plummeted, and I was not even able to breathe. Basically, the contractions were so intense, and she just flew down the hall and started trying to find somebody. And the nurses came flying back, and they wheeled me out and into the delivery room. And they called the doctor, who was in a restaurant nearby with his wife, and he came over. And as I've told you before, literally, I can see him coming through it's like on a TV show. I can see him coming through the door. Somebody putting the green jacket out. He's got his hands like this. He puts his hands in the green jacket. They put his hands into the gloves. It's like he's rushing towards me. And I hear this horrific scream in the background. I think, who in the hell is that? And it's me, because I have ripped totally from vaginally to anus, and you come delivered into his actually outstretched arms.
Makes a diving catch.
It's basically, really and truly, I think he had time to actually kneel as you came out. And but then there's silence, and I see that you're very purple. That's about all I can see from my perspective, and I'm in a lot of discomfort. And they take you over to the little table, and people start working on you, and I hear something, and then they rush you away. And what happened was the placenta had erupted, and you were just without oxygen, and you had this little circle like ET in your chest, and the rest of you was purple because your body shunts all the oxygen to the center of your body to save your heart and to allow your heart to continue to pump blood to your brain. And your APGAR, you're on a scale of 1 to 10. Most babies should be like a 9 or a 10, 8, 9, or 10. You were a 1 at birth, and then they give you another APGAR. It's based on reflexes, cry, breathing, respiration, things like that. And so you were 1 at birth, and then 5 minutes in, when they do the second check, you were 3. And so they put you in intensive. They put you in NICU.
So it was essentially like a stillbirth at birth.
You must have had a breathing reflex. You had one. You had one of the 10 things. That's all you had, and then you had 3 of the 10
So I was
things.
just barely hanging on.
But you were also 9'15" and a half ounce shy of 10 pounds.
I was late, right?
You were almost 2 weeks late. So you were huge.
Huge and dead.
Huge and very limp. But you were fine by day one. By the next day, you were totally recovered. They'd given you oxygen, and they did do one good thing back then. They had already became aware of retinal detachment due to oxygen, so they'd never, because before that, just like my valves, they were putting oxygen mask on babies, but they had gotten to that point where unless it was essential for life, so they put you in oxygen. They blew oxygen on you to increase the percentage of oxygen you were exposed to compared to just air oxygen saturation, but they didn't mask you. And then, but because of the abruption, you had it's kind of like an ulceration of your intestinal tract and your stomach because the lack of oxygen exposure when everything got shunted to the chest area. And so you kept vomiting formula up. And so that's where the IV thing started. The occlusion in your femoral vein didn't come from the birth trauma. It came from the fact that they kept trying to put an IV in you, and you were so big, you would tear the IVs out. They would put them in, and then they turn around, and all the other babies were like little mice babies. These little 1 pound, 3 pounds at the most babies. Here they had almost a 10-pound baby who literally didn't really fit into the little thing. I mean, you could put your arms and feet out of it, and so they eventually did a surgical insert of a IV into your growing area, into that femoral vein, and then they tied your leg to a board so that you couldn't move and wouldn't jerk it out. And so that IV stayed in for several days, and that's what happened is once they pulled it, that it healed itself. Instead of bleeding, it must have had some kind of bleeding in it, and it occluded itself, and we never realized it.
The femoral vein occluded, like it blocked the femoral vein.
And then over time you developed all these
compensatory veins to bypass the blockage, which is why
the capillaries and everything just became huge.
Yeah, I have this very snake-like highway of veins that is exposed on my abdomen. That is the bypass, the detour.
And when I would ask what I consider to be our wonderful pediatrician about it, she was like, "That just is how he's made." And it was never a satisfactory answer, but it again reflects the lack of knowledge within medicine at the time.
Yeah. We're still not quite sure what's going on with that. I need to get that investigated as soon as I have insurance again.
Especially since now the same doctor has been not very good, even though he's got a good reputation.
Well, in light of the issues that you're having with your lack of blood flow to the brain.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
that was your birth.
I survived.
You survived that. At the same time as that incident happened, my grandfather had died before that incident, which was really good because I think it would have really freaked him out.
Really good, huh?
It was good it was not good in the sense of he was not doing well. It was a relief for him to pass on, and in all these situations he would have been traumatized too. So that respect, it was good that he'd passed away for all these things happen. It would really upset him, and he would have been real angry with your dad and other stuff too. But
was my dad there
at the birth?
Yeah.
No. Because he had gone to make a bank deposit, and it took him a while. No, he arrived later.
Shocking. You're saying my grandfather would have been upset with him because he wasn't present, or just because he just didn't like him in general?
No, just he would have, he was a very responsible human being who took care of everyone, and he would have thought your dad should have been more forthcoming much earlier on in this whole relationship, like getting married and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Responsible, not
yes, and then it would have, and then my grandmother was still alive, but she was developing Alzheimer's. And so after you were born, the reason we left Louisiana and Monroe was really multiple reasons. Your dad and I couldn't really resolve our relationship. My grandmother was developing Alzheimer's, and I was trying to go and care for her, as well as having you as an infant and Katie as a child. And I talked to Mom and Lawson, who were both here, and it just seemed like the best thing to do was to try to move her to Atlanta, and at the same time I moved to us as well. And so we all came together. And then, actually I just came over here to see if I could get a job, and I got a job pretty quickly, and so then we made the move, and then they went over and got her and moved her stuff. And then we moved here in this house.
What was the impetus for moving here after I was born? Things are just not working out with...
Yeah, I mean, it was just I needed support from my grandmother. It just seemed like my whole family was over here.
I don't know if you just mentioned this, I just blanked, but okay, so I'm born.
Mm-hmm. I'm still involved with your dad and the kids, but it's not going anywhere. My grandmother
he's not being supportive as a father or taking responsibility for his new son?
I didn't ask him for any financial support.
But you are still in a relationship. We're
still in a relationship. The kid, there
wasn't just any assumption on his part that perhaps he should contribute to the upbringing of his son.
I don't think the business was doing that well. I just didn't. I'm just me, Allie. I'll just take care of things myself, and I don't.
So you recognize that he wasn't going to be involved with this new child.
He was involved. We still saw each other on weekends. We still were dating each other. If that doesn't make sense, because your siblings were
right.
Also,
and I'm not trying to draw. I'm just really trying to understand the picture. I'm not trying to paint myself as a victim or some sort of neglected kid here. I'm just trying to understand, because it seems like you've glossed over. It seems like a pretty major section of my life that you're glossing over. So I'm born. Mm-hmm. You're involved in a romantic relationship with the father of your child.
Well,
but yet 6 months later you decide to move to Atlanta. So what happened there?
Well, I would say we were less and less involved romantically. because I realized that this wasn't going to go anywhere, and what is the point of continuing this relationship if we aren't going to get married? Because we have a lot of children involved in a situation, and I love all these people, and they now have a shared sibling, but I also had a grandmother who's falling apart, and it was becoming a very unhealthy situation. It just wasn't healthy, and so it seemed the better thing to do would be to go, and that's what I did. And I continued. There was still some degree of sustained relationship with the kids in terms of phone calls, but not really like anything. I think we might have seen them at Christmas. We might have come back to see everybody at Christmas, or had them come. I can't remember.
So you decide to move to Atlanta.
We moved to Atlanta.
Because your grandmother's in Atlanta and
No, she's in Monroe. She's having Alzheimer's. I'm not able to take care of her on my own with you, work, and Katie. So I talked to Mom in Lawson, and the decision was made. First of all...
You talked to your mom and her brother who are living in Atlanta.
And Jay's in Atlanta. Sean's in Atlanta.
Your siblings are in Atlanta.
Everybody's here.
Your immediate family's in Atlanta.
It seemed the better place for us to be in terms of support systems. It also seemed at this point that my grandmother wasn't going to be able to live by herself, and so my mom said, let her come and live with me. She and Lawson, of course, lived 4 miles from each other. It was just mutually helpful for everybody to live close to each other. And so I came to see if I could get a job, and we did, and then we moved. Your dad then panicked, and then retrospectively, I think he was still attached to Julia and his relationship with Julia, even though she'd been gone for a while and was in mental institutions and they'd been divorced and all that kind of stuff. I think there was an obsessive connection there. He couldn't let go of her. And so that was probably one of the interfering factors with him being able to say, I want to marry you. But once I left and moved and took myself away from him, then I think the obsession switched to me. And so then I was getting phone calls after you guys would go to bed, your dad would call, and we would have these long conversations over and over and over. And I can just remember, this is probably the dumbest thing I made, except for that your sister came out of this. It was like February, you were a year old. My father was also dying, and so, because he had colon cancer. But I can remember him continuing to say, we just continue with these same conversations and me saying, Hugh, I need you to either stop calling me or we got to get married. And I don't know why I would make that decision, but I don't. But anyway, we ended up getting married to each other.
Or you're looking for some sort of stability, it seems like. You're looking for some sort of answer or certainty in your life. Either you're out of my life, and so then I have the certainty that I'm moving forward without you, or we're getting married, so I know that you are certainly a part of my life and we'll move forward together. I can understand that. Okay. There's a lot of lessons that you're saying here that I've now experienced as an adult, right? Or my relationships. The girl that I've most recently been involved with, really my only serious girlfriend ever, has kind of asked, obviously, the stakes are a lot lower because there's not any children involved, and marriage hasn't been a part of the discussion. But the same thing, right? In terms of she wants to know, listen, are you going to be in this same city with me and we're going to try to be boyfriend and girlfriend here? Or are you going to continue to live this vagabond, impulsive lifestyle that you live, and we kind of have this kind of pseudo long-distance relationship? Like, I can't play this middle ground anymore. Either you're here with me or we're not together. And I want, as me, and who I am, once again, I'm starting to recognize parallels between me and my father. I want, my cake and eat it too. I want the freedom to bounce around from place to place and live this vagabond lifestyle and have, the emotional security of this person that I love, right? But very understandably, she doesn't want that, just like you didn't want that. You want to know, listen, are you in my life or are you not, right? And I can also draw the parallel between what you were saying about his obsession switching from his ex-wife to his current wife, right? We chase that which retreats from us. You want what you can't have. And I've experienced that same thing with this girl in particular and other romantic relationships in the past. It's like when you're with that person, you're like, okay, this is cool, but at least the way mine works, and I'm starting to assume the way my dad's mind works, it's like, okay, well, I have this in front of me, but what else is out there? And so your mind starts to wander. And then all of a sudden when that person gets sick of your lack of commitment, then and your mind wandering, they're like, all right, get the fuck out of here. all of a sudden that person doesn't want you anymore. That certainty, that relationship's no longer there. Then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second. Like, now that this person is retreating from me or is no longer a certainty, an option that's in front of me, now I'm going to go after that person. Now I'm going to pursue that person. So it's this constant back and forth. So it's good to hear you say this. I'm learning from this.
It's like being also enveloped in something that you can't quite fight because it's not really doing anything to you. It's not like Ronnie throwing the thing or trying to restrict my behavior. Your daddy never did any of those things to me, and he brought some really cool experiences into my life, but he was neglectful and he wasn't doing stuff, but yet you can't quite pin down what it is he's doing that's harmful because it's not direct harm.
I imagine if you interviewed my ex-girlfriend, she would, although there have been some specific instances where I haven't been quite honest or I've been deceptive or whatever.
Oh, I'm sure for your dad too.
But generally speaking, I would imagine like her criticism would be the same. It's not like I can't point to an instance of him being like an asshole or like mean or abusive or any way, but like I can't pin this guy down. I can tell he's not fully here with me or not fully committed. It's the same thing. It's fucking scary. I mean, it's cool on one point to like, holy shit, I'm just like this person in a lot of ways. This person being my father. But it's also scary in some ways because I don't hold him in very hard to regard as like the caliber of human being he is. But I see so many parallels in myself. I'm like, fuck. But I think it's helpful going forward. And this is a really big reason I want to do these interviews. And probably most importantly with you, but also with my friends as well. So I can like reflect on these things and then learn from them and grow from them. So, and
your dad was never at this place at 30. He's never been at this place. He's now 7.
You're talking about me at 30?
Yes. You already have an awareness that your father has never obtained, and you're not addicted. So there's growth. You have the potential for addiction. I think that
I'm chugging coffee.
Right. But you recognizing that, I mean, that's why, I think it's just like, it's, like Caroline goes to Al-Anon and stuff, all those kinds of meetings are probably things that would benefit you, even if you don't use anything, you know what I'm saying? Because I think those same behaviors are present. Al-Anon, something serves its purpose to help you be mindful and aware. Mm-hmm. So, and I will say that even here with you, Allie, I feel an absence of, there's not quite the same commitment to me that I sense from the girls, and I've always kind of just left it alone as you're my boy versus my daughters. And I've had other women say that their relationships with their daughters are different. I mean, and I do this for a living, so, or did, and so I know that there'll be a difference in that. But I sometimes feel like I'm intruding on you, like. Like we were teasing about the inner sanctum when I went to the basement, but I do feel like that you need a life separate from us, detached from us, as opposed to integrated with us. And since you're not my boyfriend and you're my son, and I'm content with that. If I were your girlfriend, I certainly wouldn't be content with that. It would be an inadequate relationship to have.
Right, but that has been my relationship with any sort of significant romantic partner I've ever had, is that same relationship I've had with you, right? Like, yeah, it's cool, like I love you and it's cool to have you around, but like I need to be my own person at the same time. Like I'm not looking to like fucking like intertwine my life with yours. I have no desire to do that. Like you're you, I'm me, we're separate human beings. It's cool like when our paths cross to like share our lives together, but at the core of who I am, I need to like have my own existence. And I'm still trying to work out, because I still trying to work out how in the future I'm going to do that with a romantic partner. And I am, for the first time in my life, getting to a point where it's like, that is becoming a priority of mine. Where it's like, okay, for 30 years I kind of have lived that way. And maybe for 10 adult years I've kind of had the experience of living that way. And I've never really had a desire to be in a committed romantic relationship. But for the first time in my life, I'm recognizing... and it's become a priority of mine. Like, okay, I really do want to give this a shot in terms of developing a committed romantic relationship with someone. It's never been a priority of mine. I've attempted to do so, but in a very I think haphazard and uncommitted way. And so I'm interested in trying to do that at some point here in the near future. And I know I want to have kids. I'm not like I want to have like 10. But like 1 or 2, that's certainly a goal of mine. It's one of the few goals I've identified in my life.
And that's a difference between you and your dad. You will be a wonderful dad.
Okay, yeah.
I see but
But on my end, I don't know how exactly the mechanics of that are going to work. Like, traditionally, you would be involved in a committed romantic relationship. Married, I guess, is the term you would use, and then you reproduce that person, and you two start a life together and raise a family together. I'm not positive I'm capable of doing that. I know I want to reproduce. Now, like, that's a goal on the horizon, a long-term goal. Now it's like, okay, how do I get to that point? And I think the first step getting to that point is attempting to be in a committed romantic relationship with someone. If I find over the next several years that that's an impossibility, then I guess I'm going to have to bank my semen and then find a surrogate mother or something. I don't know.
Then who's going to help you raise the child, too?
No fucking idea. I have to do it on my own. I don't know. These are lessons I'm trying to learn. The first step, though, of the lessons I'm trying to learn and like actualizing myself as a 30-year-old man is having these conversations with you and my sisters and my close family and friends just to learn from their experiences and then grow from those lessons I've learned.
And I want to say to you, there's never a moment in my life I've ever doubted that you love me. Like, I know you love me. But I also simultaneously recognize that there are some restrictions on, like, I know if you tell me, like, if I ask you to do something, if I ask you, first of all, I think you know that I wouldn't ask you unless I needed it. And so I know that it will happen. I never think that you're not going to follow through with something. I don't expect you to perceive my needs normally ahead of time. I also think that's also a male characteristic sometimes, or that men and women need different things, and so why would you notice what I need more than, you know? And I recognize that you just need to be more isolated from us. And then sometimes I wonder that I allow that to happen too much. And like yesterday, just saying, sit here and watch Parks and Rec, you know? Why do I always let you walk around with earphones in your ears or maybe we should be making sure don't say.
If you try to intervene, I would find that very annoying.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I know that, so I just let it. But at the same time, this is not. So perhaps this is, as a family unit, since we are now all living in this home together, we're sort of living like
not really. I'm leaving in 2 days.
Right, but we're sort of living like roommates versus mother, brother, and sister. But maybe a good thing would be, especially if you return and Morgan is still here, that we make an effort to have dinner together once or twice a week so that we engage in a familial relationship.
Well, me being here for the past several weeks is not, like, we've never established, like, this is the long-term plan. Hopefully, like, your two grown children won't be living in your basement or living in your house for the long term. That's not the plan. But if, although I will say, if at some point I do have a kid, be it with a committed partner, but certainly if it's by myself,
you might
there's a very strong chance that I'm moving back in the basement with my child.
Your child's not going to live in the basement.
Well, he can live upstairs. He or she can live upstairs.
You're going to have to live upstairs, too, because when the baby cries in the middle of the night, both of us can respond.
No, you got it. I'll be in the basement. We'll keep the kid in your room. Anyway.
I want that house on the lake, Allie. That's a requirement.
I'll get it for you. All right, let's get back to the chronology of this all. So you moved me. I'm at 6 months old at this point to Atlanta, and we move into this house that we're sitting in now.
Mm-hmm. We lived with Teddy for a brief period of time before we bought the house.
You lived with your mom for a short period of time, but essentially we moved from Monroe, Louisiana, to here to Atlanta, in this house where we're sitting now.
Within a couple months, your dad has worn me down, and we've agreed to get married, which we don't do. He says, when I make that statement to me, he said, okay, let's get married. But this is February, and it takes him May until he can actually follow through on that commitment. And at that point, he starts telling me we're going to get married by the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans.
He's serious. This is
totally serious. He said, how about let's get married in the cemetery? I found the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. She'll marry you in the cemetery. I was like, I'm not getting married by the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. And I said, Jim Comier, who, I shouldn't mention people's names. He had been an assistant minister at the church where your dad and I met in Monroe. He had moved to New Orleans, and I knew that he was a minister. He had his own church there. And I said, let me contact him and see if he'll marry us. So I contacted Jim. Jim said, oh, yeah, sure. I said, we don't want any big ceremony, just us. So he said, well, you'll need a couple witnesses. I said, fine. As Hugh was working down there, he was actually living in New Orleans at that point. And your siblings were up here in Monroe with Mimi and Papa, had been moved to Columbia after I left. And so I fly for like a 3-day weekend, take a day off from work to get married to your dad. And he had gotten the marriage license. I had arranged Jim's time, and he was supposed to tell 2 friends of his that what was happening and get them to come be witnesses. But he was too embarrassed about the whole thing, so he hadn't done anything with regard to that. So we're driving to Jim.
Sounds like a good start to a successful marriage embarrassment. That sounds like a solid foundation to matrimony.
It's just the whole, not the embarrassment of me, but the embarrassment of the whole situation. And I don't know. Your dad, he would just get self-conscious about stuff. So I just was like, fine, this is just one of those things.
This is how the rest of my life is going to be.
But just, they're just things anyway. So we are headed towards Jim's church, and we pass, this I just think is an interesting story. We pass a sorority conducting a car wash at a gas station, collecting money for their sorority. And so I say, pull in. And he's like, and I jump out of the car and I say, hey, we're getting ready to get married. Would you guys consider for $20 coming and being witnesses to our marriage? We're getting right down the street at this Methodist church. And they were like, oh, and they were very excited, and they were in their little like Sophie shorts and t-shirts, and two of the girls jumped in the car and they went with us, and it was like this wonderful thing they thought was so exciting and romantic, even though it wasn't really, because it was a neglectful thing on your father's part. They signed our marriage certificate, the 2 18-year-old girls. Well, I don't know, they might have been 20. And then we drove them back to the car wash. And that was but your dad had planned, he might not have concentrated on the ceremony, but our restaurant and musical, all the things he'd had. The
celebratory aspect.
The celebratory was wonderful. And we had a really cool, like in the middle of New Orleans apartment kind of thing that he was staying in. It was just, we saw this child. I can remember, it was a very memorable wedding.
Pleasant experience.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And then I went home. And then
home to Atlanta.
And he stayed in New Orleans, and we were making plans then that all the kids would come and live, and once the school year ended, we would come and get them in the summer, and they would all move into the house with us. Well, when I arrived, and I brought you and Katie went to see your dad while we were there for a summer visit like normal, and then I went with you, and I realized not one person knew we were married. I don't think Mimi really believes, probably before she died, that we really were married.
Mimi being my
grandmother. I think she probably went to her grave thinking we probably really weren't married. But I didn't jerk out a marriage certificate to prove it to her. I just, let her be Mimi. And so... And that maybe was when Papa made the statement about, I don't know if Robin realizes how little he's really into the kids. And so...
His father.
And he was wonderful, as he has always really been. And I think any lack of involvement he had was only because he was under her influence.
The spell of his wife.
She just was more a stronger figure. He's strong in quiet determination, but not strong in let me verbally have an argument with you about something. So anyway, your dad, and at that point we pack all the kids up. They were actually not, I expected them to be so much more excited because we'd all been so close, but they were thrown, understandably, because they were unprepared. And their grandparents had been taking care of them all their lives. And at this point how old was everybody? Hugh Jr. was going to have to go into 6th grade. The girls were in 4th grade. Preston was in 2nd grade. So it was... it'd been a couple years of time had passed, and they were going to Atlanta, and they were like scared. And so, but they were troopers, and they were wonderful. And I had plans for the boys to have the basement. I thought they'd be excited about that room. I had plans for the girls to have the biggest bedroom that's not the master bedroom, and you had the teeny room because you needed a crib and be alone to sleep and stuff. And the boys were very, very scared to be in the basement, and they were used to sleeping, all of them together. So I put the girls into the master bedroom primarily so that Katie could have a bathroom access where she didn't have to be with the boys, since they weren't really her siblings at that point. So the girls had their own bathroom, and the boys took the room I intended for the girls, and all of the boys, including you, had the hallway bathroom to access together. And your dad and I moved to the basement, and it has the half bath. And my only dislike about that was that I was so far away from you as a little baby and everybody else in case anybody needed me. So we actually put in an intercom system that was portable at that point. It wasn't an permanent one, so that I could hear what was going on upstairs.
So it's you, my father, and at that point, me, my older sister, your 2 kids, and then his 3 kids.
Yes.
So 2 adults, 5 kids in this house.
Yes.
Not a really big house. What did you just say? There's 2 bedrooms, 1 kind of tiny closet bedroom.
But it's legit bedroom because it has a closet too.
2 bathrooms upstairs, each with a shower.
And a bathtub in one.
And then there's the basement that can double as another bedroom and a half bath.
And really, it can be too big. So what you treat as the closet, we treated as our bedroom, and then the other room was another room.
Got you.
So,
but it's cramped.
Yeah, but it wasn't. I mean,
it wasn't
people live in a lot tighter situations.
Yeah.
It was just 2 kids in each bedroom and 2 adults in the other bedroom, and you by yourself in the smaller bedroom in a crib. And everybody was happy. I think the only person who sometimes was overwhelmed was me when I would come home after work and your dad was working out of the house, and I would leave. You know how I am. I leave a very put into place, pristine home. When I walk out in the morning, everything's in its place. And when I would come home in the evening, having picked you up from daycare, it would look like it had exploded. And your father would be cooking some elaborate, wonderful meal, which is wonderful too. He was a good cook, or I would be cook, or he wouldn't have done anything, and then I would cook like a mediocre meal because I'm not a good cook. And every now and then I would lose it, and that would be my only time to really get angry. Every now and then I would get mad at your dad because he hadn't done something, and then every now and then I would get mad at the kids, and they will talk about the time Tummy made the pile. Which is, I finally said to them, pick up
Tummy was the nickname they gave you because
I had been pregnant with you and I had a big tummy.
Got you.
And I said, pick up your stuff before you go to bed and or take your baths or whatever. And they all did all their things. And I always read stories to everybody at night too. So what we had started, because I would be tired, was that I would read. You would go with me wherever I was reading a story, or I would read you your own story if it was getting later and I wanted you to go to bed earlier. I would read a story to the boys one night, a story to the girls the next night, and they could read to themselves on alternate nights. Anyway, before the story hour, I had gone maybe I'd gone to my room or do something with you. Maybe I was bathing you. I can't remember. But anyway, I came upstairs and nothing was clean. And so I grabbed a laundry basket and I started putting things in it. And I said, everything I find is going out into the trash. And I was just like, I was just about to lose it. I could just, you just remember events where you're just on the verge.
Yeah.
And that was my on the verge event. So, anyway, they all laughed. They came running to get their things, to pick them up before I picked them up. And I really don't think I threw anything out, but it was sufficient. I never had to do that again. And then your daddy, so they
move in summer 89 from Louisiana.
End of July, beginning of August. School starts in September. And somehow, again, Allie, Morgan fusses at me, but we had a drawer with condoms in it. I've never been on oral contraceptive or any other kind of thing. Morgan thinks I was, but honestly, I just didn't even have, and I guess I did have time to prepare in this situation, like to look at other alternatives, but maybe that's my worst flaw as a person, is planning and getting things or making decisions about what I should do for things. And so with regard to contraceptive, I always let your dad be in charge of it. And with Ronnie, I always let Ronnie be in charge of it. And I wasn't saying, my understanding was we were using a condom. I saw the condoms being pulled out and, things like that. So again, Morgan is conceived. And pretty soon after he moves in, because unplanned again. And so that also probably lowered my tolerance for behavior and also raised my
tolerance for behavior?
Like
my father's behavior?
Yeah, just not his contribution to parenting and family, like mowing the yard. And your dad didn't do yard work. Your grandparents always brought somebody up from Columbia to do the yard work for him. So the responsibility for all of you as a family, and also I was the breadwinner. I was the yard man. I was mostly the cook. He would do fun meals. And the laundry person and the maid and everything.
So what role was he playing aside from sperm donor?
Well, he was trying to operate a mail order business out of the garage, and then later he actually rented office space and was doing well enough to have some employees, but still not making not as much money as I was making.
So his role was struggling businessman who wasn't contributing to the family financially in any significant way?
Not really.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay. So I was starting to fuss. And really and truly, he had made an effort to try to get employed in Atlanta. He put out a whole lot of resumes. He'd done a lot of work to try to get employed. And because of his history and because Atlanta is a very competitive place, he was not able to get employment outside of doing something on his own. And he really wanted Specialty Sound, the music company that he'd had, which was a very, very strong business when he was younger. He really wanted that to become still viable and active. And I was being much more critical of him as it got closer and closer to Morgan's birth, and I was getting more and more panicky. Also, hormonally, I'm irritable. I mean, just you haven't experienced being like married to someone, but there's just, as you get, you're just not your best self. Sometimes you're a wonderful self. Sometimes you're not a best self. So anyway, the stress was getting more strong, and I was being more critical. And so I wasn't probably the most fun person to live with anymore. So the end of that school year, I took all the kids down to Seagrove, and we had been there, Florida. We had been there before, and your dad was going to meet us down there for the weekend. I took everybody for the week. He came down, and we had made a plan that he would drive everybody to Louisiana, Katie to see her dad, the kids to see Mimi and Papa. And so he drove to Florida, spent the weekend with us, packed everybody up, except for you. I wouldn't let you go without me. And I just said, I'll come later and bring Alex to see them. And because my school year always went 2 weeks longer than the kids' school year. And so you and I drove back to Atlanta. He drove everybody to Louisiana. When the 2 weeks was up, I called and, it was like, so what are we going to do? Basically like, am I coming there? You coming here? Or are you just going to bring the kids back? Because it was getting close to Morgan's due date, and I wasn't sure I wanted to drive by myself to Louisiana. I think this was like beginning of July. She was born at the end of July. He kind of hemmed and hawed, and then Caroline grabbed the phone from him and said, Tummy, come get me. But, and as I said, they were reluctant to live in Atlanta, but at this point they wanted to be here. And I said, what? And she said, Tummy, come and get me. Daddy's not bringing us back. And I said, yes, he is. He's going to bring you here. She said, and you said you'd come get us anyway, so just come and get us. And I was like, what? Put your dad back on the phone. And what had happened was, while he was there, he and Mimi, I probably had told her I was being like critical and stuff. And he wanted to make the business run. So they had put together this idea that they would put together the business. They would give him some money to invest in that, and they would help him build the business back up, as well as that they were going to give us some of the land, and they were going to build us a home in Columbia. And
Columbia is the small town south of Monroe, like middle of nowhere, Louisiana.
Yeah, and as racist as you can get. And that was their plan for us, except they forgot to consult me about that plan. And anyway, that was I of course would have had to have acted positively for that to have occurred, and I didn't act positively, and I've told Caroline this as well as I've told you guys. That to me is the most negative thing I've ever done as a person. Well, I mean, maybe it's up there anyway. I'm trying to think, but I didn't go get Caroline and Preston and Hugh. I don't know that Hugh would have come, Junior. I mean, he and I are very close, but I don't know. Well, first of all, I don't think he would have given them to me.
Right.
So reality is, but I feel like I should have at least driven there to have it out with them. But I'm afraid if I had, I would have ended up staying there. And I didn't want anyone raised there. I didn't ever want to live next to Mimi, really, honestly. And I didn't want to. It was part of my reason for leaving Monroe Beyond would be that I wouldn't have wanted you guys raised in that kind of environment and the limits of the education and the opportunities and the choices. But in Columbia, to me, that's like death. And in terms of intellectual death.
Right.
Thought death. So I made a choice between your welfare and Katie's welfare, and that, to me, of Caroline, Preston, and Hughes. Although I know realistically I didn't really have control over those destinies, but I still feel that way. And Caroline, thank goodness, has told me that I don't need to feel that way. But anyway, and I think they were happier there than I like to think of, not to like to think of them, but imagined them to be. And I think they were, they were okay. And they've made other choices except for Preston, who, has maybe some of his mom's genetics things, or maybe it's just all the early drug use. Or even his mom's problems early.
So he takes the kids back to Louisiana. Your understanding was those temporary visits just to visit their grandparents for the summer.
A couple weeks while I was finishing work. Mm-hmm.
And they never came back.
And they never came back.
Just a couple quick questions. What role... Well, first off, what was his reaction to you getting pregnant with Morgan?
I'm sure he would have liked to have terminated all pregnancies that ever happened, but we didn't have that discussion.
Abortion was never explicitly discussed.
No, I think with you, I don't even think with you it was so explicit. It was more like, what are you going to do? Like to me, what are you going to do?
Right.
And he might have said, you're going to have it or something like that. Or, he wasn't at a point where he would have said to me like, if you don't have it terminated, I'm not going to date you anymore. He didn't ever say something like that. It was just more, well, basically like if you choose to have it, that's kind of like what's going to happen.
It's on you.
Yeah, it's on you. And it was on me, but he didn't totally bow out. And even in this situation, we continued to be married. When he moved back to Columbia, we continued to be married to each other. I was the one who actually initiated divorce proceedings finally, because I was actually scared about what he was doing financially. And I thought our credit had never been actually put together. I mean, the way we got married, and he has his own business, and he's 10 years older than me, so he was a fully established adult being. I was a fully established adult being. We were married to each other, but I bought this house on my own before we even got married, so he didn't even have that kind of claim on it. It wasn't like a co-signed thing. Everything was separate, and I just started to get worried about some things I knew he was doing financially, and I thought, I can't let him take me under with him, or anybody tie me to him financially and come after this house or whatever. And I initiated divorce proceedings to separate myself from him financially.
Right. So it sounds like once you got pregnant with Morgan, he kind of understood, like, all right, she's going to have this one too. Mm-hmm. I'm getting the fuck out of here.
I think he was, I'm going to go somewhere where we can have support other than me, which was going to be Mimi and Papa.
So you think he genuinely was not just necessarily trying to escape his responsibilities, but genuinely was like, I'm going to go back and set up shop back in rural Louisiana with you and us.
And that's all he'd ever known. And at this point, he's 43, 44 years old. That's where he's always lived. That's his whole existence. That's his environment.
Right.
And Mimi and Papa were always there as his backup people.
Another quick question to kind of wrap up your marriage to my dad. What was the role of like substance abuse during that time? What impact did that? What role did that play in the ultimate downfall of your relationship and decision to like not try to keep that marriage alive?
I don't think the substance abuse had a. It was such an inherent part of his being. I don't know when I've seen your dad without substances. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I know what your dad looks like without substances. It wasn't like he was sitting here drinking, like some alcoholic person sitting in a chair drinking. Mm-hmm. I think he did it all surreptitiously. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of what he did was pharmaceutical medications that he had gotten from friends who are physicians. Because I've seen him get something out of a mailbox before, and I know that person left him some medication. Mm-hmm. I think he probably has a storehouse of medications, some legal, some illegal, and always has. He always had a drink while he was cooking and stuff, if he was cooking. Mm-hmm. I suspect he probably drank driving in the car before he got home. Might have gone to the basement and had a drink. I just don't. He was a closet drinker. I didn't drink. Mm-hmm. I consciously, even, when I was a kid, I probably, like every college person, drank on the weekends or something. I've just never been a drinker. My parents weren't drinkers. My grandparents weren't drinkers. And I mean, once their grandparents were, but I would, not the ones I lived with. So it was just not, I don't know.
I thought there were instances where like you would find alcohol bottles in the trunk or beer cans. Like
oh yeah, that's true.
Like,
that's true. I totally forgot about that. Yes, one time I went to put something in the trunk of his Mercedes. He has this old Mercedes, and I opened up the trunk, and you're totally right. It was totally full. It was full of like Jim Beam and beer cans and.
Well, that seems kind of.
Yes. Yes. So that's what I'm saying. Though.
Seems to implicate him in some.
Yes,
sort of
I'm just saying.
abuse.
I'm sorry. I did tap the table. I'm just saying, I don't know if I know what your father looks like without substances.
Gotcha.
You're saying, what's the impact? I don't know, because I don't know that I ever saw your father. Maybe in the mornings he was substance free, but he kind of walked around like in a stupor until he could wake up with he drank a ton of coffee.
Well, that's
coffee all day long, and then I'm sure he started drinking and using pills.
Well, that's the understanding I have from my siblings on that side of the family, is that basically that's how it works. Like he wakes up and tries to make it to like the end of the workday, and then it's like party on. We're getting after it. We're getting fucked up.
Well, in this home, it didn't happen visibly.
Right.
I'm saying I think he did it all, but because I don't know how he handled it when he was working out of he was working out of the garage. I don't know how he was drinking when he lived here, when he had to do the business in the house and he had to live in the house. But eventually he moved the business, and I think it was Woodstock where he moved the business. And so there would have been at least probably a 45, 50-minute drive from there to here. Mm. And I suspect that's where he did his drinking. And I mean, like I said, he might have had a drink or two at night here, but I wouldn't have thought about a drink or two at night. And your dad was always your dad. He was I really think he just lived in this way of being that that's the only Hugh I knew. Mm-hmm.
All right. So summer 1990.
Morgan's born. They're gone.
They move back. He takes them back to rural Louisiana. You decide there's no way I'm bringing my kids to start a life in rural Louisiana.
They were all my kids at that point, so that's the heartbreaking thing for me.
Right.
Yes.
You felt they were all your kids. And so you were torn because you wanted to rescue his kids, who you felt were your kids now, but at the same time you felt this, obviously, responsibility to me and my older sister, and now your unborn child, Morgan, my younger sister, to not subjugate them to a life in rural Louisiana. So you decided
next to Mimi and Papa. Well,
so you decided to keep us here in Atlanta, and that's kind of when the paths diverge and like a new chapter is born.
But we stayed married until Morgan was like probably 2.5 or 3 years old, and
he wasn't there. By the time Morgan was born in end of July 1990, he was in Louisiana.
Yeah, he didn't come back for her birth.
Right, so that was the end.
Yes, but we did do things like vacations. We still did things to keep all the kids together. Christmases, vacations. Remember them coming in the van? Different
took a trip to Los Angeles at one point.
Yes, and from Los Angeles, in both the Los Angeles trip, then your dad and I actually took one to Bermuda together, where I thought we were going to get back together. And I think Morgan was 2.5, so you would have been about 4.
I remember it being in preschool when that happened. I remember us having to stay with like a babysitter for a extended period of time.
Yes, it was one of the people from the gingerbread station came and took care of you, one of your teachers.
So there was an effort during the first few years of Morgan's life, my toddlerhood, essentially, early childhood,
to put our two families back together.
To kind of still keep the families incorporated. But I guess it was...
Well, the trip to Bermuda, though, your dad told me that we were... Both Los Angeles and Bermuda, I was told that we were going for a music conference or some business type of conference. I can't remember what kind of conference it was now. I was told that, especially the Bermuda trip, that he invited me to accompany him on a conference that was supposed to be paid for, and I don't know how he afforded it. Anyway, we got there. I kept saying, one of your workshops, one of your things. There was no such conference. It was all a lie. I don't know why. I don't even now remember why or how he decided he wanted to go to Bermuda. We had a wonderful time in Bermuda until I figured out that this conference was never going to become forthcoming. We were supposed to have a couple days without the conference, and then the conference was supposed to occur, and the conference just never materialized. And that was probably the defining event in our relationship, because I'm sure I was lied to prior to that point.
You think?
But I was the distortion of reality that he would think he could get away with this too was so like, oh my God, this is crazy. And then on top of that, I started and on top of what I had already started to be worried about with in terms of the financial things and somebody maybe coming after our house, it was like,
this is it.
Yeah, this is it. And also, right after that, I had a conversation with him about he was going to have to start providing some degree of child support just to help me pay the child care bills. And I can remember yelling. I went to the basement, and I was yelling at him. And on the phone, you've got to at least send like $100. I think I was just like trying to get $180 or something to come. Yes, on a regular basis from him to help with the child care expenses for you guys, and that may have been like to cover one of the two of you, versus. And I remember we had portable phones, and I had gone into that second room of the basement to get as far away. Katie, you and Morgan were upstairs. I think Morgan was asleep, but anyway. And I turned around, and you had followed me down the stairs. I didn't realize it. And I turned, and you were standing there, and your face looked horrified. Like, why is Mommy yelling at somebody? And I remember just saying to him, I'm hanging up. And I hung up the phone, and I thought, I'm never going to talk to him about money again. I'm never going to let money alter my relationship with another human being. And I'm just going to have faith that this is going to work out. However it's going to work out. And I'm not going to see that face on my child again. Because you've always been hypersensitive to things. When I be worried, I've told you that thing about one time I was just worried. I was bathing in the bathtub, and I must have been frowning because I'm probably worried about how we're going to do whatever or make this payment or whatever. And I'm bathing you, and I'm thinking we're having this happy interaction in the bathtub, and you go, Mommy, why are you mad at me? And I said, Babe, I'm not mad at you. Mommy, you have your mad face on. And I kind of just backed away from the bathtub, and I stood up, and I tried to keep my face frozen to see what you were seeing, and I was frowning, and it was worry. And you can see now I look like a smoker because I'll scrunch up my mouth, I'll scrunch up my face because I worry all the time.
Right. Your emotions are manifesting themselves
right now.
No, not now,
But you picked up on it. No one else said to me, Mommy, why do you have your mad face on? Morgan was probably just born. She was a little teeny baby, so she didn't have a chance to manifest that question. But you were like probably under 3 asking me.
Yeah, I can remember from my earliest memories recognizing, I don't know what age this was, but pre-kindergarten. I can remember from my earliest memories that like this situation is kind of untenable and like a house of cards. And recognizing and especially I guess probably exposure to, other families that like, oh, there's a mom and a dad here. And like,
I only got one mommy who's up on my roof blowing off the leaves.
Yeah. I remember recognizing early on, like, oh shit, like this is a balancing act here. Like it seems like we're kind of constantly on the verge of some sort of crisis. And I don't know, maybe this is a good transition.
Segue into the anxiety.
Segue into like, the next chapter of this interview is that like that was the impetus and I would say the causal factor for anxiety, as you said, at a young age for me, and then ultimately my development of OCD is my earliest compulsions with obsessive compulsive disorder. And obsessive compulsive disorders, you start to manifest in these compulsions and conduct these behaviors as a means of controlling the anxiety. And in elementary school, it was walking home from school.
And what age are we talking now?
4th, 5th grade. Mm-hmm. Walking home from school and knowing I had to walk like at a certain path, step on certain like cracks in the sidewalk or avoid certain cracks in the sidewalk or step in the same way or walk in the same way. And if I didn't engage in these compulsions, if I didn't complete these routine, then you were going to die on a car accident on the way home from work. And like, then we're all fucked. And so I remember from a very early age that like, fuck, this is all kind of hinging on my single mom here who's working full time to raise me and my 2 sisters. And I'm very aware that financially, like there's not a lot of money to go around here. And how exactly is this all going to work out in the long term? And if God forbid something were to happen to my mom, like, how are me and my sisters going to survive this scenario? And I remember that being, very prevalent on my mind from an early age. I'm talking as a toddler. And then that ultimately manifesting itself, and perhaps there was, you have your own theories about me getting really bad strep throat in 5th grade and who knows, maybe this vascular issue that we've touched
head
on
injuries
plays in it. I had head injuries throughout childhood for sports, or just being a
catapulting out
kid.
of the tree.
Being a rambunctious kid. At some point, something happened where it clicked from just worry as a young child to right around the end of elementary school. Once again, who knows whether or not it was a head injury or a strep throat or whatever it was. Something clicked to where it kind of turned horrible, and I started developing these really bad OCD symptoms. And the primary anxiety I was trying to manage through the compulsions was the fact that our family was a house of cards, essentially.
But also there's the genetics, and also I think your father has the same thing, and I don't know what his precipitating factors were. But then I also said to you that you don't seem as aware of my needs, but then perhaps what it is really, Allie, is that you're more aware, and you were aware, and your self-protection is to become more insular.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that may also be your father. And your father didn't have anybody to talk to about it. He was living with the people he was living with, and there was also the generation, the age in which he lived. And so what did he do? He medicated and he numbed himself.
And I've done the same thing as an adult. And as a child, I did the same thing, the same kind of criticism you're offering to me now, that I don't have the same relationship with you as your daughters do. I handled the OCD the same way as a child for, over a decade. Was, I'm not going to let anybody know about this. Like, this situation is already pretty precarious as it is with this family. I can't come out and let my mom know that, like, my mind is being consumed by these constant obsessions and compulsions, and I'm starting to feel like suicidal ideations because I can no longer manage.
You can no longer keep me alive.
Right. I wasn't going to let kind of put that burden on you. I constantly felt throughout my childhood. So now we're talking 4th grade through sophomore year of college, that, like, okay, if I can just get through this one set of compulsions, like, this will be the last time. This will be the last time. For over a decade, I thought, like, okay, if I could just wash my hands 76 times right now, then I'm done. I just need to get this one compulsion done, then I'm done. And it was that constant routine for 4th grade through 14th grade. For 10 years, I just need to get through today. If I get through today, I can sleep, I can wake up tomorrow, and I'll grip my way through it, and I won't engage in these compulsions anymore. I'll just tie my shoes like a normal person. I'll get up from this couch. I won't have to go through some sort of routine with the pillows. When I go out to the soccer field, I won't have to, like, jump back and forth over the lines, or when I do a throw in, like, pick up the ball a certain way, or when I put on my pads for football practice, I won't have to strap them on over and over again, or fuck with the straps on the helmet over and over again, or when I line up for a play, I won't have to line up my feet on the line in a certain way. Like, I just need to do this one more compulsion, and then tomorrow I'll be good. And I'm not going to say anything to anybody, because I don't need to bother anybody with this shit.
Plus you're a strong man, and plus the rituals and the superstition, you probably can't tell anybody either.
What do you mean? Like, you can't describe it to someone in an accurate way?
Well, no, I mean, like, maybe that messes up the obsession. I don't know. I just threw that out as a possibility.
Well, no, I think more. I think that keeping it a secret and not letting anyone know about it was a combination of, one, I didn't want to burden the family with this additional issue, and then also, I'd been a successful kid. Like, I'd been successful academically, I'd been successful athletically, I'd been successful socially, and so it was very embarrassing to me that all of a sudden,
self-image,
all of a sudden I have this major issue. And it started to have, right around middle school, it started to have a very a real effect on all of these areas of my life. My grades started to drop because I would, I couldn't read a book. I couldn't read a book because I'd have to read the same sentence over and over. I'd have to, swallow saliva at a period when I got to a period, or before I turned a page. I would have to look at the number certain times, complete some sort of mental ritual as I'm looking at the page number. And then when I was doing my math homework, I'd have to, circle each number as I'm numbering my problems a certain amount of time, or do a whole page of just writing the numbered problems over and over. It's like all of a sudden I couldn't complete the basic components of my academic assignments. I mean, like I said, talking about just turning a page became an impossibility. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden I become this straight A student in all these honors classes, to now I'm failing tests or not completing the reading assignments because it's impossible to do so while trying to manage these compulsions. So my academic performance started to drop in middle school. And then my athletics performance starts to drop because, like I said, I'm having to tie my cleats in a certain way. So now I'm in the middle of a soccer game, but all I can think about is like, oh, fuck, I've got these cleats on, but I've put them on the wrong way. Or when I stepped on the field, I didn't step on the field the right way. fuck, but like before we start the second half, like during halftime, I'm gonna have to redo these rituals. I'm gonna have to take my cleats off, my shin guards off, and put them on the wrong way again. Or I'm gonna have to take my shoulder pads off and put them back on the right way. So now all of a sudden I'm supposed to be focused on the play or the action that's occurring in the game or in the practice, but my mind is elsewhere. So now my athletic performance starts to drop. Fuck. Now it starts to spiral, right? So now the anxiety that I'm just experiencing naturally about the precariousness of our family situation is being compounded by the fact that my performance is now slipping in these other areas. And now when I'm starting to go hang out with friends, I can't leave the house to like go hang out with my friends because I'm trapped in my room trying to get my clothes on in the right way. And all this starts to build up. And then right around towards the end of middle school is the first time I started to think like, man, I don't want to do this shit anymore, man. Like, this is just way too much of a burden on me. Like, waking up every morning and having to, like, fight this battle every single second of every single day, it's just not worth it. I would rather... Not that I don't want to be alive. Like, I enjoy being alive when I have these brief respites of my brain not being entirely consumed by this OCD. But I feel like I've been fighting this battle for a few years now, and I'm losing it.
Gotta be exhausted.
Whew! And you're not sleeping because when you go to bed, you have to do certain rituals to go to bed, or you're up all night, like walking up and down the stairs to the basement where my room was. So I'm up till 4 a.m. doing these compulsions, walking down the stairs. And then even when you fall asleep, the OCD still exists during your dreams. So now you're dreaming, and you're dreaming about playing soccer, you're dreaming about just having everyday things going on, and now you're having to perform the compulsions in your dreams. So there's not even escape from it at night. And so it's just constantly, your mind is obsessed. You feel like you're losing control of your mind. So then eventually it's just like, it's not like I don't want to exist. It's not like I'm depressed. It's not like I don't see any point to life or there's a hopelessness to existence or anything. It's just that it's just become really fatiguing to fight this battle every second of every day. And not even during the waking time, during my sleep as well. Man, it kind of seems like it would be nicer just to like not exist at all. And that's when I first started getting these suicidal ideations.
And the physiological, neurological stress. I mean, just everything. How in the world did you keep on going? And I mean, and yet I couldn't get you to. Maybe those things wouldn't have been the right things to do anyway. But you didn't want to see anybody. Didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want to. Yeah,
I didn't want to get it addressed. And so at some point, there's only so much I could hide it. Right, my friends would notice things, and I've talked about this with them, and I think maybe I brought this up in interviews with some of my close friends about, like, did you guys notice this OCD stuff? And they did, but they thought it was more of a quirkiness. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's only so much I could hide it, right? And
as soon as what I noticed was the output.
Right, so
you addressed it. I mean...
Yeah, so talk about when you first started noticing things, because at some point it wasn't as if... At some point, you did notice things and tried to get me to address it in some ways. I'm going to go pee outside again. Talk about that.
I think so too.
You got to pee?
Yeah, pause it. And let's just go.
All right, so let's pick up where we left off. We were talking about when you first noticed OCD symptoms on my part.
So I had no idea about the 4th or 5th grade stuff. In fact, did Morgan have any idea about any of the behaviors?
I don't think so. She was younger. Like if I was in 4th or 5th grade, she was in 2nd or 3rd grade.
Yeah, I just knew you guys walked home together. The thing that did happen in 5th grade was that your 5th grade teachers asked me to come for a conference, and
let's go downstairs because Morgan's on the phone upstairs.
Okay.
Oh snap, we're going. I'm going to run out of space here at some point. Okay, so at what point did you become aware of?
I had no knowledge when you were in elementary school, and the only thing that I can think of that kind of hinted that something might be going on neurologically was when your 5th grade teachers, 2 or 3 of whom were male, asked me to come in for a conference. And when I came in, they told me they thought you had ADHD and they wanted me to take you to the doctor and basically put you on Ritalin. And I just looked at them like they were nuts because, I mean, you're an active person, but I'd never really seen any focus issues or any problems like that. And also First of all, an ADHD problem would be identified way before 5th grade, and you were an A student, and you'd been in the gifted program since 2nd grade. And so I said, have his grades dropped? And they said no. And I said, basically it was like they were concerned about handwriting. So I bet you some of the handwriting stuff were starting to express themselves. I didn't see it at home yet. They were just seeing an inability to get stuff accomplished. But they couldn't really describe what it was. But I said I was not going to put, medication was out of the question. And I mean, in my mind, you had an addictive parent. And anyway, that's just not where I was jumping. They kind of said, well, then we're going to have to put him on student support team. And I was like, well, that's fine.
What is that?
It's the support team you do when we're looking at whether or not someone needs special education support. And they never did it. I think they were just kind of like really just wanted me to get Ritalin. And when I think about that, and this is a statement I actually want to make if you're going to put this out for public broadcast, I do not think that we should be using pharmaceuticals with children until we can identify the actual, and even then I'm not sure, because first of all, we have nothing but observational data to base our decision making on about right now. I mean, there is some more valid research going on with MRIs and PET scans and things like that, but we're just guessing. And if we had gone on their guess that you had ADHD, not mine, but theirs, and some doctor or some other parent had you and had put you on Ritalin, that would have only made anxiety issues far, far worse. It would have been, and then I just think back about all the kids, we just don't know. Your anxiety and your OCD stuff certainly could be misinterpreted as hyperactivity or distraction. You know what I'm saying? And so until we know what we're addressing and what neurochemical needs to be improved, and I'm so glad that we're looking into mindfulness activities and meditation. And anyway, it's criminal. And I know it's just the nature of science. It evolves as it goes. But I'm glad that I didn't address it pharmaceutically. I did want to address the OCD pharmaceutically because really when I did realize it, you were in 7th grade, and it was that time, I've told you this story before, but you were sitting at this dining room table, which is where you always did your homework, and I just proceeded as being an obedient, wonderful little boy or big boy at that point. And I'm sure that sitting at this table in this particular chair and probably was part of your OCD. You probably had to do your homework here. I don't know. Is that true? You always did it here.
Yeah, probably.
I don't know that everybody else had a place they did their homework. I was nearby, so that may have been part of it. I always did. You did your homework here. I was in the kitchen cooking.
In this very seats we're sitting in now.
Well, I'm in your seat.
Yeah.
And you called. So this is 7th grade. You're in an advanced curriculum. So you were taking high school algebra as a 7th grader, Algebra 1. And you received your credit for it, high school algebra in 7th grade. You were sitting at the table, and you just kind of banged your fist in exasperation. Oh, I can't do this. And I kind of said, what is it? And you said, I can't do my math. I can't do my algebra. I said, hold on just a minute. And I just took the pot off the stove and put it on a different burner. And I walked in here and to see what the problem was. And, thinking I just help you understand how to do it. And I looked at the paper, and as you had said about yourself earlier, you had written the number, except you didn't write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 down the page. You had written the number 1 and written it over and over and over, and then circled it over and over and over. And then below that, you'd started 1 again, and 1 again, and 1 again, and 1 again, and every single one of them was just black from the number of times you'd written the ones and the number of times you'd circled the ones. And down the page were at least 10 ones. And, of course, no algebra problem was written. And I knew immediately what it was because by that point I knew enough about what was going on with your dad. And when Hugh Jr. was having something, it's just I remember wanting to vomit. I mean, it was just but I didn't say, just like you, I just went in, that's appropriate for me. I'm the adult, you're the child. I didn't say anything. I just basically said, oh, you're just having trouble getting it written down. And you're like, yes. And I said, well, just stand up, let me sit down. And then I just took your pencil and I just turned the book to you and I said, read me the problem and then you tell me what you think you should do. And you looked at it and you told me the problem and then you said, oh, the answer is. and you solved it. It was just an algebraic equation, but still, you solved it in your head. We didn't do any of the steps. You just told me the answer, right? I mean, so there was your cognitive, maybe that's part of a contributing factor too, is your awareness. Again, like I was talking about your sensitivity to things. You knew exactly what to do. You knew already the answer to the problem. Your brain would not let you physically write anything down. And so we just did the entire page. I made you tell me step by step. I said, teachers aren't going to be, and then I wrote a note at the bottom. Alex was having trouble getting his writing today. I wrote this, but he solved all the problems. And then I called the next day and asked for an SST meeting, a student support team meeting. I said, I need to come in and see you guys, because I knew what it was. And then I called a friend of mine, Karen Pape, and I called Martha Little, who's a psychiatrist, and I asked for appointments with both of them. And we went to visit Karen, and you were reluctant to visit her, but once you did visit her and realized what was happening, the second time you wouldn't even go. You jumped out of the car. I mean, you went with me, but when we got there, you just panicked and you ran. And I had to go in her office and tell her he's, outside, and it was just such crazy behavior for you. No one would have known because you were never ever a problem. You might do stupid stuff, like you and Patrick painting the cul-de-sac, or you swinging on the tire swing and deciding to see if you could fly from across the street to the Bagush's house, and you cracking your skull on the concrete. But I don't think you've ever disobeyed me. You used to have rages when you were in kindergarten, just weird, like crazy, kind of like stormy stuff. So, neurologically something had to be going on at that point. But again, even within the fact that I do what I do, the science has never been knowledgeable enough. It's gotten, now we have greater understanding. But I've talked to the pediatrician about that. I tried all sorts of behavioral things. But I was also trained as a behaviorist. I wasn't trained like neurologically as I am now at that point. And so, anyway, that just ultimately went away. And so, but then from that point on, I was aware of things. I was aware of you stepping in and out of my bathroom when you would take a shower, and you would come upstairs and say, I can't get dressed, watch me. Because it seemed like if I watched you, you could get yourself dressed better. Or you would lay your clothes out on the ground like they look like a person, the shirt, the pants, the socks. And so and then sometimes my physical presence would seem to help you get.
Well, it just held me accountable. I knew if someone was standing there watching me, I had to get dressed. Yeah, I can remember doing that in middle school, maybe even high school. I can definitely remember in middle school, like literally stand here and watch me get dressed, because I knew if someone was sitting there watching me, the shame of engaging in the compulsions would be too much in front of another person, especially my mom, that I would just force myself to get dressed, and I wouldn't engage in the compulsions because I'd be so embarrassed if someone else was watching me engage in the compulsions. And
I think the OCD that I was aware of is kind of like an iceberg. I only saw a little piece of it, and down below the surface are like the veins on your body. There's just this little tip that I saw that gave me a suspicion of what was really underneath, but I had no true understanding of the amount of ice that was below the surface. Mm-hmm. And I truly just wanted it not to be, and I also didn't know what to do, because you wouldn't go to the psychologist. We went to the psychiatrist. You did talk to her, but you didn't want to take any medication. She was totally like, I don't want to make him take medication. These were the people that I talked to Dr. Brown. That's the professionals that I went to for support didn't have an answer either. And then you hid it enough and you coped enough, which is a testimony to your inner strength as well as to your capacity to perform, that I could pretend like, or even hope that, really more, not even pretend, just hope that there was just a little bit of an interference, but I knew it was there. And then also when you got older as a teenager in high school and I would address it, you get really mad at me for addressing it. Like, I think it's still there. Aren't you having trouble going in and out of my bathroom? Or, and I suspected that some of the facts that you didn't have like a girlfriend, or I don't know. But anyway, I just remember thinking, is there, like even taking me to the prom, was that just part of not being able to figure out what to do, just a coping thing? And so was it just that it was funny to take me, or was it just part of all this whole picture? And it was hard to know, because you have a great sense of humor. You have you are quirky, but all of us are quirky. That's part of who.
Yeah, the social thing, no, I don't think maybe obsession with certain relationships, yeah, or an obsessive desire to make something work with a relationship. But me taking you to prom, no, that had nothing to do with it.
That was just funny.
Yeah, that was just funny. There's a contrarian streak to me, and I got into this in the Hunter interview to where in high school I never wanted to go to, and this is kind of getting away from the point. I didn't want to participate, and it's still now, like I have no desire to get married. I have no desire to live this traditional lifestyle. In high school, it's the same thing. I have no desire to go to homecoming or to prom or whatever.
The status quo stuff.
Right.
You don't want us to do things on assumption.
That's separate from the OCD. Or maybe it is intertwined in terms of like I become obsessed with the contrarianism. But no, I just got voted to prom court. And so and my good friend's girlfriend was in charge of prom. And so my initial inclination was like, I'm not going to fucking prom court. I'm not going to prom and being on prom court. But she's like, no, that's going to fuck up like the whole mechanics of the prom. You need to go.
So, okay.
And it was like a week before prom. So I was like, okay, I'll bring my mom.
Yeah, and that makes it funny. That also allows you to participate in a kind of contrary way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, and to touch on like your efforts to treat it. Yeah, like I remember you bringing me a psychologist in middle school and us showing up there. And it was these times, and the same thing with like you kind of calling me out in high school when you would kind of see these OCD symptoms reemerge and you questioning like, are you sure everything's okay? Like I'm still seeing X, Y, and Z symptoms. Yeah. Once again, that's embarrassment. That's shame. That's you calling me out on it and me recognizing my efforts to suppress it are not working. And that not only am I fighting this battle every day to overcome this OCD and keep trying to convince myself like today's the last day I'm going to do this. It's like an addict, right? With drugs, like this is the last hit of heroin I'm ever going to take. After this, I'm done. Same thing with OCD. Like this is the last time I'm going to fucking, wash my hands 1,000 times. After this, I'm done. I just need to relieve myself of this compulsion. I'm done. So you're fighting that battle every day. And on top of that, you're trying to hide it. And then all of a sudden, your mom's calling you out for it. And you're like, fuck. Not only am I losing this battle because I told myself yesterday I was never going to do this again, but I'm doing it again today. And I'm trying to hide it. So now I'm unsuccessfully fighting this battle because it's continuing to reoccur every day. And now I'm unsuccessfully hiding it. So then you call me out on it. And so I react by, no, what are you talking about? I'm good. I'm good. I'm stepping out of this, in and out of the threshold of this bathroom because I want to, or whatever.
This is where I also get to the place where mental illness should be neurological illness, and that gets back to the same neurotransmitters and the pharmaceuticals that we prescribe and stuff like that. I'm totally appreciative of Freud and psychotherapy and all that kind of stuff, and that applies to people with common problems. But true neurological things that are going on, I mean, I totally think that your things and Morgan's things. That's why I bring up the strep throat. There's an immunological response that I think has happened that caused your body to overreact and to attack your basal ganglia, and Morgan's body to overreact and attack her pancreas. But it's very socially acceptable for Morgan to say she has juvenile type 1 diabetes, although I would like to also say I don't think that we even appreciate enough what she goes through on a daily basis and the strength it takes to be her. But exactly the same thing has happened to you, which was a physiological thing that I think is altered. And I recognize that you think it has some connection with our family, which I'm sure environmental influences, just like what we ate, influences Morgan. The environment made it, you experienced some of our anxiety. But I think truly that it's a physiological thing that happened, that would have happened regardless of where you were brought up.
I don't know about that. I bet
you have basal ganglia damage.
Right. Well, when you've heard of the basal ganglia damage, that's your theory that I got a really bad case of strep throat in 5th grade. So I guess to the point where like my tonsils got so infected that they like abscessed and ripped off the side of my throat. And then you think the streptococcus virus then attacked my basal ganglia, this part of my brain, which then brought about these OCD symptoms. But totally possible. Who knows? I don't think we'll ever know like whether or not I would have developed this OCD regardless if I had been raised in a perfect environment without any physiological illness and I think the way I look at it is it's a combination of both. Genetically, I was probably predisposed to develop this mental illness, and then it was probably also exacerbated or brought about by maybe that strep throat. The anxiety of growing up in a household with a single mom and being aware of how precarious the situation was. the shitty diet I ate growing up, the amount of sugar I consumed as a young child. Like, who knows? I think it's impossible to isolate all of these variables and determine exactly what factors contribute to what. I think it's a combination of things. And I think that's kind of aside the point.
It's also, though, what the world needs to be thinking about and where the world needs to evolve. It's how the world needs to be changing.
What do you mean?
We need, in terms of the foods that we feed our children.
Oh, totally.
And the pharmaceuticals that we put in them, and our approach to behavioral change. That's what I'm talking about too, and our approach to illness and just a lot of different things. I think it's such a complex. We're such complex organisms. It's all fine balance, and the balance was out of whack.
Yeah, and mental illness is a very hard thing to approach because I want to touch on the pharmaceutical aspects of things because you touched on, you were speaking of when I was in 5th grade and my teachers kind of pushing you to put me on ADHD medication, you pushing back to that. I did the same thing when I taught 4th and 5th grade. Granted, I was teaching a population of students who were, in my self-contained classroom specifically because they suffered from severe behavior disorders. But I would notice that the kids that were on Ritalin or Adderall or whatever ADHD medication were performing so much better than the kids that weren't. And so I would have kids both behaviorally and academically. And so I would have kids in my classroom who weren't medicated and who were all over the place, both behaviorally and academically. And I would start to push their parents in the direction of at least investigating the possibility of putting them on medication. And shit, I was a 22 to 25-year-old kid at the time,
And if I realized the amount of pain you were in,
who was in charge of these kids, then I had limited experience. I was just trying to do what I thought was best for those kids, just like my teachers were trying to do what was best for me. And all my only experience and exposure to all those factors was I saw the kids that were on medication performing better behavior and academically than the kids that were off the medication. But, then you got to get back to, the structural aspect of the education system. What are we doing here? We're locking these kids in a box and forcing them to sit in, a desk for 8 hours a day and stare at the front of the room. Is that... Of course a child's going to struggle to do that and may have attention issues, behavior issues when you're locking,
And we're feeding them with all the sugar before.
And you were forcing them to do this and we're...
I'm sorry.
Of course these kids are going to struggle to try to complete these tasks. You're forcing them to sit in these desks for hours at a time. But ultimately I did address my issues with pharmaceuticals as well. But, kind of wrapping up this part of the story, these issues continued into high school and into college, and it wasn't until when I went off to college my freshman year, I kind of made this concerted effort and did this personal training camp the summer before freshman year of college, where I convinced myself this summer after graduating high school, the summer between high school and college, I'm going to prepare myself for this next phase of my life. And I really am no longer going to engage in these behaviors. And I think I actually did a pretty good job of engaging in my own personal version of cognitive behavioral therapy, where I just kind of exposed myself to all of these different factors and just made a really concerted effort and gritted my teeth to try to rid myself of these OCD symptoms. And I would say I reduced them maybe 75% by the time I started my freshman year of college, to where my freshman year of college was the first time in my life that I read my first book. In my freshman year English classes, I was reading my first book, reading my first chapters in textbooks, studying for the first time. And all of a sudden, academics were a walk in the park, right? I was getting straight A's freshman year. It was like I was in 4th and 5th grade all over again, where I was at the top of my class academically. But then when I transferred schools and came back home to the University of Georgia, the shit started to rear its head again, and the symptoms started to come back. And I'm thinking now in hindsight that might have had something to do with the fact that I started drinking alcohol. I started partying once I got to UGA, and I was consuming alcohol on a regular basis. I'm thinking that maybe that played a role in the fact that these issues started to remanifest themselves. And then ultimately we decided, that was the first time I really reached out sophomore year, and I reached out to you and said, when it was, I remember reading a philosophy textbook sophomore year in my apartment in Athens, and it was I was back in fucking high school over again. I was reading the same sentence, wasn't able to flip the page, doing some sort of compulsion on each period, or the page numbers. And then I remember just like, fuck it, I'm not falling back into this trap. And so I called you up and I was like, hey, can you get me an appointment with somebody? And that's when you got me an appointment with Dr. Little, psychiatrist. And ultimately she did put me on Ritalin and Adderall, if you remember that. And that was fantastic, like in terms of, like, it's like putting yourself on, it's like on steroids, right? So you can focus incredibly well, and like you have this like unlimited source of energy as long as you're taking the drug. I don't know how much it helped with the OCD, but once you put me on the antidepressant, it was like a walk in the park. Like all the symptoms that went away. The analogy that I draw is when I was experiencing the OCD symptoms, it's like your mind is a castle, and around the castle your castle is constantly being bombarded by, the barbarians at the gate who are, they're attacking the castle, attempting to burn it down. And without the medicine, or without any sort of treatment of the OCD, all you're trying to do, managing it by yourself, is like erect a wall or erect a moat around the castle to keep the barbarians out. But it's impossible. They keep climbing over the wall and entering the castle and tearing down the castle. And then once I got on the medication, it was like all of a sudden I didn't need the moat. I didn't need the wall. The barbarians disappeared, and I just had this castle sitting atop the hill, and my mind was functioning harmoniously without any issues. And what was that when I first got on the medication? 2007, 2008?
I think 8.
And so it's been like a decade now since I've been on it, and I've made attempts to get off it a couple times during that time, and actually I'm attempting to do that now, and I want that to be getting some more specific episodes, some episodes specifically to deal with that. But every time I've attempted to get off it, it's not as if the OCD symptoms return. It's now for the first time, it's like you experience these withdrawal symptoms from the medication. It's not as if I get off the medication, all of a sudden I need to wash my hands 1,000 times over and over. Now it's like your brain is a computer with a virus and it's just not functioning correctly. It's just like your brain is on repeat with the same thoughts cycling over and over and over, and there is like more of like these depressive symptoms that come in, this sense of hopelessness comes in that I never experienced prior to being on the medication. So that's the scary part now, is that yes, I used this drug to eliminate the OCD symptoms. They eliminated the barbarians that were attacking my castle. But now, once I recognize, like, oh shit, I'm cured of OCD. The medicine cured me of OCD. I don't need to be on this anymore. You try to come off the medication, and now all of a sudden you've got a different problem. Now it seems like, from what I can tell, your brain isn't capable of producing serotonin. And so now you're experiencing different issues. Now you're experiencing like racing and cycling thoughts. Now you're experiencing a little bit of symptoms of hopelessness and like darkness to existence. It's like more depressive symptoms. It sounds like, fuck. Well, at least I'm not trapped in sort of these compulsions every day. But now it just feels like once again, to draw the analogy of your brain to a computer, now it feels like my computer is just running like with a virus in it. It's either running really slow, or it keeps having to reboot, or it won't turn on, and so it just brings a whole different set of symptoms. So that's kind of my journey going forward, and I want to document this in this podcast. My attempt now to get off this medication again. We'll see where that goes from here. Go ahead. I'm going to actually pause here because we're about to run out of space. We'll just let me delete some stuff on the. All right. Sorry about that. We just need to get more mirroring. You were chiming in.
I don't know. I was going to say something about, I guess. So I was saying that I have conflicts with our use of pharmaceuticals without us knowing exactly the neurological transmitter we need to be impacting, because everything we do is based on observational data rather than as much physical data. But I mean, a lot of medical science is that way. I'm sorry. I support mindfulness and meditation and yoga and things to try to treat neurological changes or deficits. You do need. What if the OCD came back? Would you? And what if you need to have some exterior agent help your body create serotonin, just like Morgan needs to have external insulin put in her body.
What if I don't?
I'm not. I'm just arguing I'm not arguing even. I'm just actually saying, what if in the future? Well, right now you just want to try, right? I mean, you just want to see if you.
All right. So just give you a quick background on how I view that. Psychiatry, based on my experience from it, I've seen various psychiatrists throughout the past decade. Psychiatry, through my experience of it, is a very inexact science.
Yes.
A terrifyingly so.
Yes.
It's essentially throwing a dart at a dartboard. So a patient comes to a psychiatrist, presents a certain set of problems. Those certain set of problems, generally speaking, fall into some sort of category of other people who've experienced some similar set of problems. So what seems like the psychiatric body has come up with, the plan they come up with is, okay, we're going to categorize these certain set of symptoms that fall underneath this umbrella title of an illness. And these drugs have been developed to potentially address these certain set of symptoms. But there's no way to target exactly what drugs are going to address what issue or what symptoms, so we're just going to throw these darts, the drugs, at the dartboard, being the symptoms, and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to go back to the drawing board. We're just going to throw another dart at the dartboard, and hopefully this drug takes care of this issue. The problem is every time you throw a dart at the dartboard, you are drastically altering the chemical composition of the brain. So what you've come up with is, what psychiatry is saying is that the brain of mentally ill people is chemically flawed. Right? There's some sort of chemical imbalance in the brain that needs to be addressed through these pharmaceuticals. And so in order to address this chemical imbalance, we're going to create a radically different chemical balance of the brain. So to address a chemical imbalance, you're creating another chemical imbalance.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
This seems like a very flawed system.
I totally agree.
So it seems to me like the more effective system would be accept the chemical imbalance for what it is, and then create other alterations, be it in lifestyle or mindfulness or some other approach to living life, or the structural arrangement of the life you're living in order to address the issue, rather than constantly just disrupting the chemical environment of the brain in order to match it to like the environment in which the person is living. So just as a specific example, right, to make this more concrete to people rather than to speak in such ethereal terms, let's go back to the kids in my classroom when I'm teaching 4th and 5th grade, or me, as you're saying, when I was a 5th grader. This child is presenting symptoms that are coming in conflict with their environment, right? The child is either having trouble sitting still, or is inattentive, or is hyperactive, or is misbehaving in some way. Their behavior, the way that they're acting, is coming in conflict with the environment, with the task at hand, which is sitting at a desk, being quiet and attentive, and completing the academic task in front of them, right? So what we're suggesting is, or what psychiatrists or even teachers are suggesting the solution is, let's drastically alter that child's neurological makeup, the chemical environment of the brain, in order to make it more amenable to the environment in which that child is required to operate. What I'm suggesting is, wait a second, why don't we just leave that alone? Because that could you could potentially create permanent damage. You could, almost certainly are going to create a host of other side effects and other issues that are going to come about from like altering that chemical environment. So by altering that chemical environment, you may allow that child to be able to sit still and complete the academic task in front of them, but now you may have completely silenced or muffled their personality or their creativity or their extroversion in some way, right? So aren't there other, isn't there a different approach that we could take, especially as an adult, where we aren't required to sit in a seat and complete certain academic tasks or to adhere to the environment that the adults are forcing us to be in? As an adult, I have the free will to operate, especially as an educated white adult male. I have the ability to, and free will to, pretty much alter my life situation any way I want. So if we're operating under this notion that the chemical environment, my brain is somehow abnormal, why am I going to just experiment by throwing darts at the dartboard with all of these different chemical arrangements of my brain in order to alter it to the environment in which we're all trying to operate in this society? Can I not try to alter my lifestyle or the way I live or the food that I put in my mouth or the people that I interact with or what I dedicate my time to on a daily basis or the goals that I'm pursuing in life? Can I not, alter those variables rather than potentially permanently altering the chemical environment of my brain, which is guaranteed to have side effects in the best case scenario? It's guaranteed to have side effects. That's all I'm experiencing it with. The other side of the coin is I have altered the chemical environment of my brain, and it has, doing so, talking specifically about OCD, has been incredibly beneficial for me. Doing so has eliminated the OCD symptoms essentially altogether. There's still certain aspects of my personality that are very obsessive. But the compulsive aspects of it, in terms of performing these compulsions in order to manage the anxiety, has essentially been eliminated. I think that's a permanent change, right? Because there's a rationality that comes with, once you're able to once again draw the analogy to the castle, once you're able to eliminate the barbarians from attacking your castle, you're then given clarity of mind and the ability to reflect from just dealing with the mental illness of OCD. You're able to reflect on the fact holy shit, how irrational was my behavior? Obviously, washing my hands 1,000 times is not going to prevent my mom from dying in a car crash on the way home. Right? So to me, it's really an impossibility that I would ever regress to these OCD symptoms. Okay. Because the medication has granted me the clarity of mind to perceive the irrationality of compulsive behavior as it deals with OCD. And my experience coming off the medication supports that. Every time I've come off the medication, these OCD symptoms have never returned. I still have the clarity of mind that engaging in any sort of compulsive behavior with regards to OCD is not going to help me manage my anxiety at all. But now when you come off the medication, your brain is left, in my opinion, I think you'd have to do some sort of, I don't even know if the testing exists in order to, verify my thinking here. But based on my experience, what I know about my personal brain and mental health experience and my psychological state, is that when I come off the medication, it feels as if my brain has been sucked dry, right? It's like it's not functioning. It's not lubricated. It's not firing on all cylinders. But it has nothing to do with OCD compulsions anymore. It feels as if I've never been addicted to any sort of hard drug or anything. So I don't know what it feels like to the withdrawal symptoms of heroin or alcohol or something. But that's what it feels like. It feels like, holy shit, my brain is missing some sort of fuel. Like I'm running on empty here. Or my gears are grinding and need to be lubricated. And so you either resign yourself to the fact that, okay, I got myself addicted to this drug in order to address these symptoms I was experiencing as a child. And so I now, am going to have to, continue to take this drug for the rest of my life and deal with the symptoms that come along with it. The side effects that come along with it. Or I can make an attempt to get off this drug and try to come up with try to fortify my brain in some way and restart it again or recharge it again to produce serotonin on its own and arrange my life in a way that I'm living a happy and healthy lifestyle. But the issue is no longer OCD.
You're just, but the suck dry is the lack of the serotonin that you've gotten used to, probably.
That's what it feels like.
So you just need to find other ways to create the serotonin, which, gets to you want to be in sun, and you do the yoga and then do the meditation stuff and all those things, yeah.
Isn't that what happens to drug addicts in general, right? You come off heroin and for an extended period of time, you're in a terrible state, right? And either you go cold turkey and your body is able to detoxify itself and eventually able to function again without the input of that drug. Mm-hmm. Same thing with alcohol.
In society, are against heroin. We are against alcohol. So we sanction someone trying to withdraw and to get off of those addictions. And yet we have sanctioned pharmaceutical use. So we are, why are you doing that?
Right. Why
are you taking yourself off? I totally get it. I really do. And I know I seem like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth sometimes.
No, I am too.
Because, well, as your mom, I don't want to see you in pain. I want the quick thing to help you fix it. And I do think there's all these complex neurological things, but I totally agree. Just watching Cora, what Katie's been able to accomplish with Coralie, who is
your grandchild,
yes, and your niece, and by taking her off of gluten and dairy and things like that, it's been an incredible. And when you give her a little bit of it, you see her whole behavior change. And so I think that's been a wonderful gift Katie's given all of us to see that too. And yet at the same time, your sisters will both be like, "Why is he taking himself off his medicine?" But you're saying exactly what she's saying about her child, and she's saying, I don't want to give my little child medicine, and I didn't want to give my little child medicine until my little child was bigger, and then I was like, oh my God, he may self-destruct. Anyway.
But let's go back to how I got on the medication. I got on the medication because I was struggling in a university setting, right? I was struggling to complete a host of academic tasks. My entire life was essentially the same as it had been over all the years prior to it. My entire existence was wrapped up in sitting in a room, in a desk, for hours a day, staring at the front of the room, listening to someone, trying to absorb this copious amount of knowledge that is being, presented to me, then having to go home, reingratiate all of that knowledge into my brain, and then return the next day and perform some sort of performative task in order to demonstrate my understanding of that knowledge. That was my entire...
Regurgitate it.
That was my entire existence.
Reasoning.
Right, that's the academic arrangement that that's the life that we force all children from age 5, and then if you complete university study to 22 or beyond to complete. That is the primary function of your existence as a child, is to go to school and perform. Okay, that's cool. Okay. But if your OCD symptoms or mental illness symptoms of any kind are perhaps a result of that environment, it seems a little unnatural, right? And so the reason I got on the medicine in the first place was to help cope with that existence. Well, that's no longer my existence. I'm now a grown man capable of feeding myself and providing myself and surviving in this world on my own. So why do I have to force myself to continue to take this medication when I could perhaps arrange my life in a way that doesn't require me to be on it? And maybe it won't work, man. Maybe being on this medication is the only way I'm going to be able to function in this world in a relatively happy and stable way. Perhaps. I don't know. But there's no way I could live the rest of my life just resigned to that fact. Without trying. This is not going to happen. I'm just not going to do it.
When did you stop? Are you totally off medicine completely now? 10, 11, 12?
I'm at 15 milligrams. Okay. So when I the dosage that relieved the symptoms back in 2008, 2009 was 20 milligrams. And I took that for several years, tried to get off it, had withdrawal symptoms I described earlier. Got back on 20 milligrams, right around 2015, tried to get off it again, same withdrawal symptoms. In 2015, when I got off it, it was bad, it was dark. But at the same time, the psychiatrist, and once again, this contributes to my mistrust of psychiatry, the psychiatrist that I was seeing at the time, when I was experiencing withdrawal symptoms, once again, the first thing that they prescribed me was not getting back on the antidepressant, the SSRI, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It was the first medication that the first psychiatrist I ever saw put me on, Ritalin and Adderall. The first approach that every psychiatrist I've ever gone to treat OCD is to put me on an amphetamine. Every single time. It's the first approach. It seems incredibly crude. It seems at best irresponsible, at worst like criminal. And I don't know why that is. The conspiracy theory side of me thinks that that's like the most popular psychiatric medication to put anyone on. So we put everyone on is Ritalin because it keeps them in the box. It keeps them focused in the box, completing these, very in the box tasks. Sit at your desk, complete, complete your spelling, complete your math homework, or as you become an adult, take your Ritalin, take your Adderall. It'll keep you in your cuticle, staring at your computer screen to complete this task, to keep the engine of society running. That's what the conspiracy theory side of me thinks, is that psychiatry is this grand cabal of quote-unquote medical professionals who just deal out, the soma to the masses to keep them focused and staring at their computer screens or at the pencil and paper in front of them to keep the wheels of this capitalist society churning.
But I don't think it's the psychiatry profession, because I happen to know people who are the psychiatrists, and I think they're just if there's a conspiracy, then they're just the victims within the conspiracy.
Right. Yeah, no, so that's just me.
Right.
That'll be the worst case scenario, right?
And the first person who wanted to give you medicine when you were little, when you were in middle school, she wasn't saying Ritalin at all, because she was going on my description of your symptoms and she was saying Prozac. It was when you were in college that she prescribed Ritalin and Prozac. After speaking to you, she thought you had two things going on, ADHD and OCD, because I remember talking to her about it.
Right. But my thing is what is this ADHD? ADHD is that the fact that a kid can't sit still in a desk for 8 hours straight? That's ADHD?
I don't.
That's a mental illness?
This became my defining thing when people would start talking to me about medication, when I would have conversations with parents. I'd say I have to see an academic deficit resulting from this ADHD. You can't just tell me that they can't sit still. And by an academic deficit, usually I wanted it to be like they hadn't learned to read. And I wanted to know that they hadn't learned to read by the time they were like in second grade. I've had this conversation with a really dear friend of mine who's a teacher who did not want her child on medication, whose husband did not want her on medication. We sat and had a very frank discussion about what the pros and cons of what they were considering, but their child couldn't read. And so they put him on medication and he learned to read within months.
Well, I've seen it too, man. I've seen it too.
And so that only reinforces for all three of us who were anti-medication. Oh my gosh, look what this medication was able to allow him to do. And so then you look at the other alternative, and we could take the other alternative, because I talked to her about Coralie and the dietary things, and she tried some of those dietary things, but she didn't go to a homeopathic doctor. She did, Kay's done some wonderful research and been very fortunate to find the person she found. But even when I talk to people and I'm like, how do I really feel about this? I mean, and I know a doctor here that I would think maybe you should consider seeing, who does the muscle testing and things like that, as Tyson says, the voodoo stuff, And
Tyson being your daughter's husband.
Yeah, and I mean, now I'm doing all the yoga stuff. Mindy who is my yoga instructor for this training I'm doing. She's into the Ayurvedic and the homeopathic and the oils and all these kinds of things that are ancient things that she's doing. And yoga is an ancient practice. And, you talk to me about God. Are the ancient practices what was our original knowledge that we've just removed ourselves from, and all this conspiracy stuff and I just went to Race Unity on Saturday, and we were talking about colonialism and capitalism and all the things that's European society. Have we been removed from really what is our ancient base? I don't know. We have Native American practices, we have Indian and I'm talking Indian, Buddhism. I mean, all these things. What is the actual center core of humanity as it exists? And I don't know. And so I'm all supportive of what you're doing.
I don't know either, but I would like to make an effort to get to to as close as some sort of, greater knowledge or understanding as I can.
Me too. And
rather
than
you
doing it.
Rather than just to accept that the fact that I'm going to be addicted to a psychiatric drug for the rest of my life, that I feel like is essentially just appeasing me to calming my brain to a point where I'm just going to sit and exist and plod along in this very traditional, conventional life until I die. I don't know. It just seems like that would be the path that I'm headed on if I don't at least make an attempt to explore an alternative means of becoming the healthiest and happiest person I can. And it seems to me like worst case scenario is okay, maybe that doesn't work. I've certainly had problems with it in the past, in which case I'll just get back on the drug and, I don't know, perhaps live a conventional lifestyle. I don't know. But I need to at least make an attempt to try to do so.
And Caroline does it because she has addressed it through her art. And
once again, Caroline being
your sister,
my older sister. What do you mean? I'm
just saying, I think she struggles with many of the same issues, and yet she has found the lifestyle that suits her issues. And perhaps, as you're saying, we're medicating away all our artists. Maybe we're medicating all our alternative people. That change doesn't occur unless people exist who are non-conforming to. We got lots of worker bees. We need the people who innovate us. And anyway.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that point. So that's what I'm planning on doing. I'm going to make an attempt to get off the medication again. I'm going to make an attempt to explore other means of treating this crazy, brain that I've been dealt with. At the same time, I'm going to make an attempt to explore other geographic areas of the world and expose myself to a diversity of cultures and individuals as much as I can, while I have the financial resources to do so, the psychological stability to do so, and the lack of actual life responsibility to do so. So that's my plan going forward. I leave in 48 hours to Panama, and then hopefully continue that journey down to Argentina and maybe back up through Brazil. And I don't know, that's the impulse I feel right now is to not only explore the alternative means of dealing with my own mind, but also just exploring the world that's out there.
And when you return, if you need any support, I would like to look at people that I know, like Mindy, who have chosen alternative routes of being and feel that they've been somewhat successful. But you, I know, are like her. You're probably going to find your own way of being. She's my yoga instructor. I'm just saying, I know people who are doing other things and have had the same issues, who are finding other ways to treat themselves. And I think probably you will do the same thing.
Yeah, I'm not some sort of like crazy pioneer in this sense. I'm not the only person that's thought of this or attempted this.
Exactly, and I just think you probably will do that. And I just think it's good to know people. And then the homeopathic person too. That I'm just saying this to you as your mom. There are other support systems out there that don't have anything to do with medicine, pharmaceutical medicine.
Well, I appreciate your support. I think that in large part is the love that I've always felt from you and the support I've always felt from you from the earliest of ages, even though when I was early on it felt very precarious and unstable, the fact that you were the only one supporting all of this on your shoulders.
Question me.
No, but I always appreciate that. It's allowed me to live as alternative a lifestyle I have thus far, and it looks like continue to do so going forward. At some point, like I said, at some point I do want to procreate and reproduce in some capacity. Not sure exactly how that's going to be. So maybe, like we touched on before, maybe I'll end up back in the basement with a child. But for now, I'd like to figure out a way not to do that. So thank you for that. And the support, I feel incredibly lucky and I don't know, inspired. Yeah, inspired by the fact that I have you as this constant source of love and support. So thank you for that. Anything else we need to touch on before we go?
Well, I will say you're welcome, but I have no choice. It's just what I feel. It's who you're, my soul. Be careful and be happy.
I'll do my best.
Be well.
I'm going to do my best. All right, Mama, I love you. Thank you for doing this.
I love you, Allie.